Okay, we are live. Hopefully you can hear me. This is far later. Wow, you really probably can hear me. I need to turn this down a little bit. It's a little loud. Let me know how the sound is in the chat. I know it is way later than we normally stream, but um, life happens, and I still appreciate everybody who shows up, whether you show up, you're a real one and show up now for the live, or whether or not you are still acceptable and watch later. No, I appreciate everybody who watches this whenever they watch it. And but I do know it's late, so this should be an interesting stream. The saga continues. I try not, again, I say this every time, but I do try not to just be critical on this channel. I try to be as impeccable with my word as I can be, as honest as I can be, and humble as I can be, which again, humility, I talk about this all the time, but humility just means honesty with oneself about oneself. That's what humility is. It doesn't mean like diminishing of oneself. It means honesty with oneself and about oneself. Sometimes that means saying things that seem, braggadocious or something, but that's not how it is perceived to others is not what defines humility. And so I try to avoid just being a critic, and I give my commentary and try and link it to my own work, and I try and comment on people's work that I think is valuable, even when I disagree with, a lot of things that they say. And as I, have stated before, there isn't anybody in this world who I agree with on everything, and I definitely agree with everyone on something, though, including Dave Farina, but I definitely disagree with him on a lot. So we are going to talk about his kind of a recent video that he did about Eric Weinstein again, and I think we are going to kind of talk about the culture of science in this, not just certain technicalities. We're going to talk about what does it mean to do good science, and why does that require engaging in good faith. It requires assuming the best about people. And that doesn't mean that if you truly believe that they are a bad actor, then you should say it. But if you truly believe that they are a bad actor, then you need to make sure that your criticism of them and your argument for that is based in things that you actually logically can judge. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about the definitional degrees of freedom in how we define scientist and philosopher, not philosopher. Well, we could talk about that too, and physicist. And I'm also going to defend some friends of mine who I know, and who I think were, stated, who were lied about. That's just the reality. But they shouldn't defend themselves because they don't need to. But I'm going to because somebody should, and it's not worth. We'll get into it. But here we go. Please let me know in the chat how the sound is, though. Hit the like button. Comment any questions that you have down below, and went on and ask me anything. I will get to them. Also, if you have any questions or have any comments, please put them in the live chat if you are watching live. And here we go. We're not going to get into the technicalities of GU or anything here, but we're going to talk about, like I said, the culture of science and what does it mean to engage in good faith. And even if you believe that somebody is a bad actor, it's still critical for you to be a good actor to engage in good faith. It is a moral necessity, and it's a logical necessity, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, first clip. This is the video. It's actually not linked below, and I haven't decided whether or not I want to link below, but the video that we're going to talk about, it's called Eric Weinstein Walks into a Bar, and it's on Dave Farina's channel. You can go look it up. I did link other links below that we're going to talk about because they were dismissed in the video that we're gonna examine a bit. But this is probably the first time I haven't linked the video below, but I might change that. But I really, I don't know. I'm trying. It's important. It's tough because you're torn between like, do I want to support, just content that you think is destructive, and a destructive culture, and give them the views that they're seeking and I'm not saying that's the only motive. I don't actually think that that's Dave Farina's only motive, but and I don't know, but I'm assuming it's not, because I have to assume it's not. If I just assume that that's the case, then why would I shouldn't talk about this at all. But I'm a bit torn on, like, do I say go and watch this whole video and give a view to this? That's up to you. You can decide. But I will say there is much more useful content down below if you actually are seeking understanding instead of just gossip or drama. But this is the first clip. It's hard to do I will just say, and I might mess up because I'm not perfect, but it is hard to be critical like this, in this type of situation, without becoming what you are trying to be critical of. So I'm really going to try, and I really invite anyone watching this to also try and hold me accountable. If you see me fall and slip up, I guess, let me know in the chat. I will read it. All right, first clip. Jeez. This first clip, and I will just, for some background, I did not have a good experience with school. That is just my bias, but it's not the reason that I'm critical of it. I am critical of how how school is not aligned with in most of the things that we teach, with actually teaching us, or actually allowing us to learn how to think and also achieve a level of true understanding of a subject. And the reason for that is that it's not hands-on, and it's primarily memorizing secondhand information out of context, and it takes you out of the real world to try and teach you about the real world. That doesn't really make sense. And also the incentives and achievements are artificial. So achievement is, do you really understand chemistry if you pass your chemistry test? Versus, do you understand chemistry if you can actually figure out a chemistry problem that you have in the real world? You have to construct some compound for some reason that's truly, like, you truly need it. And are you able to do it? Do you know how to do it? Do you know how to separate different elements that are already in some type of solution? These are actually constructive chemistry problems, just like fixing a car is a real problem. Do you understand how a car works because you passed a test that talks about, has all these questions about the different parts of a car? Or do you understand how a car works because you were able to fix the car and you got real world feedback that proved that you understood, you had a level of understanding that was at least sufficient enough to achieve your goals? Versus a test. A test has no goals, and goals are the primary contextualizer of any even concept of understanding that you could possibly hope to have on anything. And so that's my issue with school. And I think that it has caused some type of culture that is really artificial, and just like its awards are artificial, its punishments are also artificial. And this is kind of, I think, an example of an adult who's not in school, kind of giving an example of this.
And how he's by the physics community. Then, to ensure that this information does not go to waste, we will apply it to some of the things he said while being scolded by Sean Carroll on Piers Morgan. Eric.
This word scolded is like, it's like teacher just being like, telling you did bad. Whatever you did, that's bad. You talked in class when it wasn't your turn, bad. Like, it's not about you failed at accomplishing a goal that you actually had. That's would be actually a real world punishment. That's not even I don't even know if you should call it a punishment, but it is a consequence for sure. And but the idea that our consequences should be being scolded publicly and shamed, and being forced to sit in the corner and wear a dunce cap while teacher yells at you in front of everyone and while they're laughing or whatever. Like, this is all artificial, and it doesn't help anyone because it doesn't teach us an understanding of truth. True consequences truly happen, regardless of whether or not someone had a goal of giving you that consequence. At least another human. Not talking about God, but talking about another human. If you can't fix your engine and you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, or you can't change a tire, or you fail to do any of those things and you try to, then you failed and you will suffer the consequences that are a real world. But if you fail the test and then you're given an F and then you don't get into your program or whatever it is, this is all artificial. This is my issue with how we do school. Every bit of a chance of real education is being sucked out of our education. They don't have shop class anymore. I talk about on here all the time. One of my mentors in science, what we're going to talk about what that even means, and in biology, in ecology, in zoology, told me that the best class he ever took in school was a shop class in high school, and he had everybody write on a piece of paper on the first day, what do you want to build? And then everybody wrote it, and then he looked at the class and said, okay, now we're going to build the tools that you need in order to build the thing that you want to build. And what this does is it gives a goal. You have a goal. I want to build a chair. That's my goal. It's a real goal too. It wasn't provided to you by someone else. You chose it. And on top of that, now we're going to teach about how to actually achieve this goal that you chose, that's unique and has unique challenges, but also is uniquely rewarding because it is uniquely yours. This is not the same thing as learning how to pass a test or teaching someone how to pass a test. I cannot tell you how many tests I was able to figure out how to pass without really understanding the subject. And you can do that. I'm not, I don't remember most of what was on the test today, and I haven't applied almost any of the things that I've been tested on in the real world. And I engage with the real world quite a bit. I have a job and a wife and a child, and this is life. And I don't have any of those things that were on the test that I constantly being required to remember. So then this brings me to the next point, which is, what is science? And in sentient singularity theory, my own philosophical metaphysical framework that I propose and speak about on this channel, it seems like there is inevitably always 2 degrees of freedom in how you define a word. I probably will call this like the no synonym hypothesis or something like that. I don't even know if this has already been discovered by linguists. I'm planning on trying to find that out because I've never been academically involved in learning what others have already discovered in the field of linguistics, I guess you would. I don't even. I'm. That's how little I know. Is I'm not even sure if I'm using the right terms, but linguists might have already discovered this in the past, which would be cool. But I also think that this is something that I have personally figured out to be true. And there's only two possible definitions for any word that can maintain coherence, and only one of them is not redundant. The other one will be redundant. And so I've given many examples of this, and I will make a specific video about it. But science is going to be the same way. So how do we think about this? Science is usually meant to mean truth. Like that's what it's thought of as meaning when we use it in the common narrative today. People used to say, and still do, but they'll say science is a method, the scientific method. It is the scientific method. And then that's not how we actually use it in our conversations. We use it, especially if you have been educated in, secular schooling, which that was me. I grew up secular completely. For anyone watching who thinks that I'm just biased because, about the differences between secularism and theism and, some of the topics that we might talk about tonight later. This is not the case. Like, this is just that we needed a word for like institutionalized truth, institutionally accepted truth. And we use the word science. And what that really means is that science is generally meant in common discussion to mean the the pursuit of or currently accepted narrative within our societal institutions regarding what is true and what is not. And that's it. It's just it is the institutionalization, the collectivized narrative of what is true, which is the same exact thing as like dogma in religion. And I'm using that word kind of technically, not in a judgmental way. It just means like, what is gospel? What is accepted? What is assumed? What is, what is taught in school. And so that's what science is. It's just the secular version of that. And it's not even, it's not that what is taught is false. It's just that, if science is just being used as a synonym for truth, then why not just say truth? Again, this is a definition that is redundant. We already have a word that means what we're trying to say, and science is just used as to be culturally. There's lots of, when we speak, the how we interpret the words that are said to us, and I spoke about this last week. More of it comes from the context of the discussion that's being had than the actual dictionary definition of the terms that we're using. Like conscious, like I said, used last week, is when we say, is the universe conscious? If I ask you that, you're not going to think he's asking, is the universe awake instead of asleep? He's asking, is the universe sentient? But we already have the word sentient, so we shouldn't use the word conscious for that. We should use the word conscious to mean awake and not asleep. And, but not necessarily just asleep. You can be knocked unconscious, and then you can regain consciousness. That's how consciousness should be probably used, instead of to mean as a synonym of sentient to sentience, because we already have the word sentient, and it can't just mean being awake, because being awake versus asleep is a specific context of, our sleep cycle. But you can be knocked unconscious, you can pass out and become unconscious, and then you can regain consciousness, and none of this has to do with, our sleep cycle. So we need a word for it. Conscious. So this is what I mean by there's no true synonyms. Why would there even be true synonyms? It's like I when I first started this channel, I had these list of like bad words that I was like, we shouldn't use because they just confuse people, and or they describe a concept that I think isn't actually true. It's like it's uh it's just it's an idea that is false about the world. And one of those that the latest one that I think is a bad word is synonym, because it's a word I think that um, exists to describe something that doesn't really exist, and you shouldn't really have words that exist to describe things that don't really exist, because then you're going to confuse people, because people will assume that they do exist. But I don't think that it would even make sense for synonyms to exist. Why would people make up words that caught on if there was already a term to describe what you were trying to describe truly? Doesn't make sense. And so this same phenomenon that I was talking about, there's no true synonym hypothesis, or that is linked to this dual degree of freedom when it comes to the definitions of language. You can choose the definition of science. It can either mean institutionalized, truth, basically, that is taught and accepted and assumed, or you can use it as define it as a method of the externalization of the thinking process. Basically, if you understand the thinking process, that it is the externalization of the thinking process, and like the truly active thinking process. Eric Weinstein said something brilliantly true, and this is, genius is, there's no geniuses and idiots. Everyone has moments of genius and moments of idiocy. Everyone. Genius is a moment. That's what it is. Idiocy is a moment. That's what it is. It cannot be a person. And if it is used as such, it's just being used as an insult, which, I don't know, just call him a dick or something. Like, yeah, or like, don't use a word that is specifically like non-technical in any way. But I don't know if those even exist, but maybe just be nice, or be kind. Not nice. I hate the word nice, but be kind. You can be kind and honest, and that doesn't mean they'll like what you say, but you can say it kindly. There is really no excuse for being an asshole, and everybody's guilty of it, but there is no excuse for being an asshole. Sorry, Dave, but like, there really isn't. There's no goal that exists that justifies being cruel, ever. We have to hunt. Well, nowadays, this is debatable, but people have had to, and do sometimes have to, hunt and kill animals or slaughter domesticated animals in order to eat. You can do that in as kindly as possible, and you should. Just because you're going to kill this animal does not justify it ever being cruel to it. And there is no, if that's not the case, then like there is no justification for being cruel. Like, even if somebody else is cruel, there is no justification for being cruel back. And we're all guilty of it. I'm not saying I'm sinless. I'm very guilty of it. I've been so guilty of it that it cost me friendships, and then now it taught me to have a little bit more self-awareness, and a little bit more humility. Not even self-awareness, humility is a better term, and reflectiveness. And I changed quite usually. I'm much better now, but it wasn't always like that. I was a lot like Dave for a while. So I get it. But Eric, though, speaking of moments of genius, like Eric said something on a podcast, and he said, different podcast, he said, intelligence is something that is actually a last resort, that we don't realize is a last resort. That is so true. And the fact that we use the term intelligence incorrectly is why so few people see that. Like, thinking is an action. that takes effort and a goal. It is not something that you just do. It's something you have to try to do. You do feel intrinsically. You don't have to try to feel. People who say, oh, I'm just trying to feel, that's, I think, posturing nonsense usually. You do feel. You can think, but you don't always think. I truly think it is a constructive, active, chosen process. It's not something that we do actually very often. And so this is very relevant to what is to the different goals that people can have and how they engage with science. In the past, I've always been fascinated by science. I've always loved science. That's a really incoherent thing to say if you actually understand all the different aspects of that. But the biology and zoology and engineering and astronomy and all kinds of different natural sciences have always been a passion of mine, and I've pursued them far deeper than anyone who has just pursued them in school, no matter what level they have pursued them in school. If they have only pursued them insofar as, the context is scholastic, they have not even come close to scratching the surface of my engagement. But there's different types of engagement and there's different types of goals. You can be focused on trying to learn what other people have already discovered or deduced or constructed or conceived of. Or you can actually try and solve a specific problem that you have identified. And you might fail, you might succeed, but that other one of trying to solve a problem, trying to do science, not memorize the facts of this establishment narrative of, natural truths about the natural world, which is, what we call science today. That's not doing science. Okay. Like, I used to be like, don't you know, like string theory and 11 dimensions. And I used to say all these things about, animals and stuff like that I heard from other people that I thought were experts. And because they, had credentials or they had a record that was respectable in some way, or seemed respectable. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. And this is not doing science. It's not. There's nothing wrong with it. You're just interested. It's like, this is me and airplanes. Okay, I am obsessed with just learning about aerospace technology. I do not create airplanes. Okay. And I do not know how exactly what it would take to build a stealth fighter jet. I've heard what other people say it takes, insofar as what is not classified, but, and I've heard a lot about it. I mean, I study it constantly, but I'm studying what other people say, and I don't know myself. I don't actually know. And so I have to know that the limits of my knowledge, of my understanding, and my ability to understand, the limits of my ability to even understand. I have never tried to make an airplane, and until I do, I cannot claim to truly understand, know that I understand airplanes. I might actually get it right. What I might say might be right, but do I know that it's right because I've confirmed it firsthand? Not until you actually engage with it and in a constructive manner. You don't. And so this is the division between Eric Weinstein and this is the division between my current goals in philosophy, metaphysics, and science, versus my past scientific goals, which were not always, except when I was engaging in the field or whatever, studying animals in the wild. You have to actually figure out how they live and figure out how, in order to find them, and things like that. I mean, there's actually feedback that's real world. unless it's like something like that, I don't actually know anything about like the planets of the solar system other than what I can see with my own eyes. I just know what other people say about it. You know, I look through telescopes. I can see Saturn. I can see the rings of Saturn. I can see, you know, Venus and Jupiter and Mars in the sky. But you know, I haven't been, you know, so and we have to recognize that there is a limit to our ability to know what we understand. And I don't make the calculations of, or, you know, actually do the calculations of to calculate orbits and then see whether or not I was right about when, you know, that star was going to be there, or that planet was going to be there, or, you know, when this comet was going to be visible. Like, you can actually use, you know, mathematics and geometry really to, I don't want to say mathematics because mathematics is more of like a language, but geometry in order to construct a model, and then you can actually test it and see whether or not you actually have a sufficient understanding to achieve the goal that you wanted, which was to predict, you know, I don't know, when Mars was going to be closest to Earth. You can do that. You don't even have to go to Mars, but you can observe it based on, you know, and use that to test the accuracy of your predictions. This is something I don't do, is my point. So do I really understand astronomy? No, not that much actually. But there are things in science that I do really understand. But those are things that I've engaged with firsthand. And when it comes to, you know, philosophy, metaphysics, and things like that, cosmology or cosmogenesis, at least, these are concepts that I've actually tried to engage with, and there are certain questions that I've tried to figure out how to deduce the answer to. This is not the same as me and airplanes and, you know, I don't know, astronomy. But Eric's goal of geometric unity is a constructive goal. This is the goal that you have to have in order to make scientific progress. Everybody that you learn about when you're trying to learn about what other people have done and deduced and claimed within our scientific narrative, you are learning about what other people have done. You're not doing science. You're learning about the people who did science, you know, for lack of a better term. And this is what Dave does. And there's nothing wrong with it. But it is important to recognize that it's that. And Dave does recognize that, but he doesn't recognize that Eric is actually doing science, which is to, you know, for this sake of this explanation, trying to figure out specific problems and answer specific questions that are contextualized within the fields that are accepted natural sciences. And whether he's right or wrong is not the point. Whether geometric unity is correct or not is not the point. It's that he's trying. That's the point. That's what makes you a scientist, not whether or not you are correct. And and not whether or not you publish papers. And so this is right here, again, to bring it back to this artificial structure, this artificial incentive structure that has been constructed around our terrible scholastic and education programs that, you know, that, I mean, the greatest sin of them is that they take up the majority of your time that you could actually use constructively to learn how to think. And you can't be taught how to think. You have to learn how to think. I can teach you the steps of thinking, and I can show you a model, and I've showed it on here before, in Excel of like the thinking process. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And you can memorize that, but that doesn't mean that you actually understand it until you actually implement it. And so that's something, though, that you have to practice. You cannot just memorize it and then you've got it. Oh, and now I know how to think. No, that's not the. This is a muscle that you have to exercise. It is like some physical task. It's a metaphysical task instead of a physical task, and it takes practice to get good at. And you can't practice it when you are sitting in a desk memorizing the achievements of others. You just can't. That's the biggest issue with school. It's not what is taught. It's about the fact that it's taking up the majority of your most productive hours, of what would have been the majority of your most productive hours, and it is placing you into a box where you can't actually go and try and achieve things. But this definition that Dave uses here in this next clip is very important. I mean, he uses it multiple times here, but this is one example. And this is going to bring me to another topic.
Physicist Curt is way smarter and cooler than stupid real physicists. And not a physicist Curt is way smarter and cooler than stupid real physicist Sean. So disregard the Piers video entirely. This puff piece is where it's really...
So, Curt is being called not a physicist by Dave here, and Sean Carroll is being called a real physicist. And Eric's criticism, which is completely legitimate and should be recognized as such to anybody that actually tries to understand even a little bit firsthand what is going on in the world of physics, not just taking the word of others, but actually wants to go and try and understand what is going on currently in the field of physics, not what happened in the past, what's going on currently, is that physics, by definition, given the title of the field itself, should be about trying to understand the physical world, the constraints and degrees of freedom of the physical world, the structure that contains these constraints and degrees of freedom. We call these dimensions in physics. People say they're degrees of freedom. Eric and I actually had to talk about this once, but I said their perspective, if a dimension is a perspective, and he was like, it's not a perspective. But I was defining perspective as a perceived degree of freedom or constraint, essentially. But I had not yet figured out the right words to describe it to that level of detail. And so I would say dimension is not just a degree of freedom. It is also a constraint, but it's a perceived constraint or a perceived degree of freedom, which they're very intrinsically tied. There is no hallway without walls. And a floor. So maybe ceiling, maybe not, but at least walls and a floor. And this is a dimension. And so the physical world, though, is that which is physically sensible. It's not just math. And that's what physics has become, is just people, doing, I don't even want to call it philosophy, because I don't think it is real philosophy. They're doing storytelling, basically, without realizing it. I mean, many worlds and stuff like that, it is not based in any observable phenomenon, and it is not even just not based on any observable phenomenon. It's not even a logical explanation for what it's trying to be an explanation for, which is, you know, the what the constants. Why are the constants the way that they are? Why, you know, why does our universe seem tuned for life, and all these things that I think are just bad questions in general. But you need a lot of context to realize that, you know, there's only probably one way to make a universe if you want to make a universe. And you have the goal of making, you know, a meaningful universe. There's probably only one way to do it, and that's why the things are the way that they are, because that's the way that they could be. But that the question is, like, why is there multiplicity of sentience instead of oneness of sentience? That's a much more like deep, real question, but for another day. But this like it is these theories in physics have really become fantasy, like delved into the realm of fantasy, basically. Like, and I don't think that's the right term to use. I just don't have a better one right now. It's just meaning to say they are not what you would. They are not answering anything that that they are claiming to answer, or even attempting to answer. They're kind of just passing the buck, and they also are not provable, and they're not what you would logically deduce. I think as the inevitability. It's not even about like what I'm not even going to get into. Is it falsifiable? Because I think that that's very limiting and kind of not incomplete view of science. Whether you define it as our institutionally accepted narrative on what is true, or whether or not you define it as a method, it doesn't matter. In both contexts, I would say that is artificially limiting, and it does not allow you to actually start to truly investigate and deduce truths that are truly fundamental, because those must be confirmed. They can't be falsified. Something that is true everywhere cannot be falsified anywhere, you know. So what does that mean? You should dismiss something that appears to be true everywhere intrinsically? This is where we're currently at. But physics is about going back. Physics is in the name. It's about the physically perceived, you know, our perceived physically perceived constraints and degrees of freedom. That's what it is. And so someone who is trying to deduce or understand or expand upon our understanding of, not memorize, truly understand even what is currently already known by some people and memorized by others, or whether or not you're trying to expand upon what is currently known, or whether or not you're trying to show why what is currently accepted is false because you're proposing some other truth. This is all true physics. These are actual, like, this is what it would mean to do physics, which is what a physicist does. It does not mean someone with a PhD in physics who works at a university and teaches physics classes, or does physics research at a university, what is called physics research at a university. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It doesn't matter. None of it matters to whether or not, somebody is actually doing physics. So we have a choice here, though. Again, what is the definition of physics? Which is going to define how it is going to constrain how we define a physicist, a true physicist, which maybe that's not even a good term. Maybe we should just say somebody who's doing physics. What does it mean to do physics as an action, or to pursue physical, understanding? It's somebody who is actually trying to construct things firsthand. It's not somebody who is memorizing what other people have done, and it's not somebody who just has a PhD because they memorized what other people have done, or has a master's in physics because they memorized what other people have done. This is not This is a redundant definition, if that's the definition of a physicist, is that somebody who has a PhD in physics. This is a useless definition, because guess what? It has nothing to do with physics. That's why it's a useless definition. The definition of physicist should have to do with physics. It shouldn't have to do with PhDs and academic credentials and GPAs and whatever, or paper publications. Did you publish a paper? Did it get accepted and peer reviewed? Why is that the definer of whether or not you're a physicist? It's not. You could write a paper that is completely divorced from any physical observables. And if you, have got a degree and a diploma that says, master's or PhD physics, should we call you should we take your publication, your paper publication, as as adding to your credibility? That doesn't make logical sense. It does if your goal is different than understanding the world, which is the goal of somebody who's a true scientist or who is truly trying to do science. If your goal is to just defend the establishment because that's where because your interaction with science is just memorization of other people's achievements and then parroting it, which again, nothing wrong with it, but honestly recognize what that is, then your passion isn't actually science. Your passion is learning about what other people have figured out and school. Like, your passion is school. That's not the same at all. And so I would argue that, we shouldn't, if you're calling somebody not a physicist, like Curt is not, he's saying Curt is not a physicist. Curt's content in the prep and attempts that, attempted efforts that he puts in to trying to understand every person's ideas that goes on on his show is outstanding. Like, that's just it's not me kissing anybody's feet. Like, Curt is not an idol of mine. He is a friend, but he's not an idol. I don't know how he has enough time in the day to do that, to be quite honest. I mean, granted, it is his full-time job, and that if it's your full-time job, then you have a lot of time to dedicate to it. But even then, it still requires an enormous amount of discipline, because he's probably putting in more hours than most people do at their full-time job, towards the tasks of their full-time job. I don't have that level of discipline. I'm just going to be honest. I learn about a lot of things. Like, I get obsessive, I know a lot of facts that I've read about all kinds of subjects, and I've thought a lot about them, even the ones that I am limited in my ability to understand because I haven't engaged with it in the context of a goal, personal goal. But still, I don't know. I'm just, it is impressive. And you have to acknowledge when somebody does that kind of thing. And same thing with even Dave. Dave does an enormous amount he knows so many things about what other people have done in science, or have deduced, or have proposed, or what is accepted. He knows so much. It blows my mind about so many topics. He has videos about like different languages, and everything from geology to different languages to chemistry, to taxonomy. I mean, so much information is parroted, really, but like that's not even being used as an insult. It's just, that's what he's doing, by Dave, and memorized by Dave, that I am very impressed by it. I'm a little I not envious, but I mean, I have a lot of things in my head that I remember or memorize or even sometimes know to be true, and I think at least in terms of the things that I've memorized, think Dave has got me beat. And Kurt's ability or Kurt's efforts in order to understand really, really, I want to say complicated, but because I don't like that term, but you know, sometimes just difficult. I don't even know if that's the right word either, but just rigorous concepts. That's what I'll say. Rigorous concepts that require learning a lot of context in order to truly have any hope of being able to steel man someone's idea well enough that you can kind of understand it. That's impressive too. Everybody has talents. I will admit that. But Dave has to admit that too. And if you're going to talk about somebody and you're going to say, this person's not a physicist, and, say a bunch of other things that we'll get into, then you should definitely first investigate their abundant, record of works. Yeah, and that's just the truth. If you're gonna be honest, and if you're gonna have any hope at being able to communicate the truth about anyone or anything. I'm gonna go to the chat, but this is. I mean, everything we talk about on here is tough to talk about. But this one in particular, this topic, whenever I talk about Dave, Farina, it is particularly difficult because there's a moral component involved where I'm trying not to just be reactive, and therefore you will end up being exactly like what you're trying to criticize. You have to really try and have a goal of what you're going to talk about with what you're going to talk about. That's a good faith goal before you actually start talking about it. That is tough when you watch something that pisses you off. And I'll be honest, Dave's content pisses me off. But that's not why we're talking about it. We're talking about it because I think he is really wrong about a lot of things. And his methodology is objectively, fundamentally flawed, and therefore not effective if your goal is the actual understanding of what is true. That's how you have to say things that detail if you're going to be critical of somebody who pisses you off. It's important. So I agree. Greetings. The satisfaction of being an asshole and winning arguments with anonymous people on the internet is too much to resist. Until it's just exhausting. I was the same. I was so much like that, and I would get into arguments online with anonymous people who I have no idea what their goals are, and I didn't even realize what my goal was. My goal was I was just being reactive. I was just trying to win, because I got a satisfaction of I just beat his argument. And I can, if I really have a difference in opinion with somebody about something that I've actually thought about, I challenge anybody to debate me on it. I'm very good. But my goal isn't even to debate anymore. It is to explain my perspective and try and understand theirs as best and as honestly as I can. But it took an enormous amount of practice. It still takes practice. I'm not perfect at it yet, but I'm so much better at it now than I was in the past. You met me, if you met me in 2016, 2015, I was just constantly arguing with people on the internet about topics that I had not thought enough about in order to justify, asserting such a strong opinion on a random anonymous person online. It's just wasting your time. But it's difficult. But it's difficult to talk. Everybody is an expert. Nobody can say anything because all Reddit jumps out. Actually, that's wrong. Yeah, and it's hard sometimes not to be that guy. But sometimes you have to be that guy, but only when you truly know what you're talking about because you've engaged with it firsthand, not because you learned about it in school or because somebody who you respect told you otherwise, but because you know that you know how to fix an engine because you fixed the engine that was broken. Okay? Not because you passed a test about what the different parts of an engine are. I've been that guy too, yeah. That gets us used to being made to do things, including believe certain ideologies. So when we tend to push our ideologies on other people and try and make them believe what we do, instead of actually being willing to learn and think about a lot about our educational upbringing, and is more of an indoctrination than anything. Yeah, it's not even that it is an indoctrination, but what that really it's important to understand what that means, because there's so much moralizing associated with that term. But what is the problem is that you are just being made to memorize things out of context information that you didn't deduce. And the biggest problem is that is the time that it's not what you're being taught. It's not even how you're being taught. It's that you aren't being allowed to use the time that you have to learn. Okay? And you're taken out of the real world in order to supposedly be taught about the real world. Like this Dave says later on in here, he's like, I help people, pass tests so that they can get jobs. And he's like justifying, his contributions to science by doing, because he helps people pass tests in quote unquote science, arbitrarily labeled science classes. I'm not saying they're not about, what we can call science. I'm just saying that there's more truths than just what we call science. And if science it just means like our institutional pursuit, or a collective pursuit, and our institutional acceptance of certain, narratives of what is considered true about the world, then what that means is that, you're going to inevitably have to branch beyond physics, math, chemistry, biology. You're going to have to get into like morality, sociology, economics, like actually, not even economics, I don't even, sociology is probably just the best term for it. And not, that doesn't, what we call sociology today and what is taught in school as sociology is not actual sociology for the most part. All this is so much more constrained. There's only, then we realize there's only one way to make a universe. And that is true at every scale. That doesn't mean there's no choice involved. God had to choose to make a universe, according to my logic implied by my metaphysics work, but it also implies that there is only one way for him to do it after he tries to do it. This was a question by the most famous physicist ever, which was Albert Einstein. And this question is at the top of Eric Weinstein's geometric unity paper. It's something like, my greatest question is, did God have any choice in the rules of the universe? Which basically means like, are the laws of physics determined, or was there like was there some type of freedom involved in it? Which I would say, even as a theist, there's very little freedom, according to my work. And Eric seems to suggest something similar, that the constraints of that frame what our laws of physics are extreme. And if that's true in any instance of our universe, it's true at every instance of our universe. Again, choice is involved. In sentient singularity theory, there's two components of causality. One of them is choice, and the other one is determinism. You can't make a choice without determinism. They are not they're not mutually exclusive or competing or incompatible ideas. They are they're co-defining and codependent concepts actually in the context of what my metaphysics work seems to imply, which really means like my attempts to logic and out and deduce, the truth of certain aspects of our world and of ourselves. So, yeah. Anyways, this is going, like I was saying though, about sociology versus biology. What is hard science? What are the hard sciences versus the soft sciences or the social sciences? And what is science? This is all going to require an enormous overhaul if we're actually going to make progress on what is progress in a more scalable way of what is fundamental. If our institutions are ever going to start to make progress on even just assuming whether or not, an institution can't understand, but and it will include people who don't understand and who do. But if even the institutions are ever going to accept a narrative that is true, whether or not, many people will accept it and not understand it. Some will accept it because they understand it. That will not happen though, if without an overhaul of our education system and how we define and judge science, what is legitimate and what is a legitimate scientific pursuit, and what is not, what is, who should be taken seriously in this discussion, and who shouldn't, or what credentials would make you more what credentials should make you more likely valuable to pay attention to, make your work more valuable to pay attention to. And I will say it's probably the opposite of how many papers have you published. If you've published a ton of papers and your ideas have not become the accepted establishment and you're Sean Carroll, then maybe your ideas just are wrong. Because why wouldn't they catch on? There's no institutional like opposition that you face. You are a public face. You are respected by pretty much most people in the physics world and outside the physics world. And the media adores you. I mean, there's so much that going for you. And you're mathematically literate, We think mathematics is science. Mathematics is not science. It's a language. But it's as much a science as language as a science. That's what I'll say. But this is there's everything going for Sean Carroll. If he can't get his ideas across, then there's something really wrong with our institutions, when the person who should have the easiest time getting their ideas across and who has put them forward and published papers still can't get them accepted and like really not just accepted. I mean, they're talked about, but really they've become gospel. They've become like general relativity has become. They've become like the Standard Model has become. Like they are part of our accepted physics narrative. Not, oh, well, maybe there's infinite universes and we just happen to exist in the one that, where life can exist. And that's why we have the laws of physics that we have, is because we are just one of infinite different possible universes. That has zero logical backing. I get why people think that it does, but it doesn't. That's what you do. You get when you are trying to look for evidence that would support the idea that that there's no reason for the way that things are, and you just need evidence. You need a model that would support that. So then you deduce what would be that model, and there you have it. But to actually think about this, if your assumption is that all this has no reason and that the universe and cosmogenesis and the Big Bang, whatever, our existence, life, sentience, it was all just a an accident of some kind of causal force, inanimate force that somehow animated everything, then like you, in order to actually think about this, like you need to assume the opposite of what of that assumption is true, and then look for evidence of that. Like Sean Carroll should be looking for evidence of theism if he wants to actually think about, fundamental reality, because he's an anti-theist. If he was a theist, he should look for evidence of anti-theism. This is how you think. You don't say, I'm an anti-theist. That's my assumption. So guess what? I'm going to assume that that's true. I'm going to look for evidence of it. It's like you already have evidence of it at least that you have accepted. That's why you have the opinion that you have. Because that's what whatever perspective you've taken and definitions you are going off of, that's what you believe. If you're a theist already, you shouldn't look for evidence of God if you're going to actually think about whether or not God exists. Honestly, you should think about what it would mean for God not to exist, what would be logically implied by that, and then you look for evidence of that which would be logically implied by that. And that's not what people are doing, though. We don't teach that in school, and we should, but then you also have to be placed in an environment in which you are allowed to exercise this. And the scientific method is that, you propose a hypothesis, and which this is what the genius of the scientific method is the externalization of the thinking process. It is, you have to propose a goal. When I was a little kid, I'll never forget this. I was so humiliated. I just wanted to know, what would happen if you did things, and I wanted to know about the world. And I was probably like 5, and I had this friend, and she went to private preparatory school, and I went to public school. And we used to do science together as 3-year-olds. We'd take Dawn dish soap and put it in a cup and shake it up, and you see bubbles and whatever, put food coloring in it. We thought we were doing science, okay? Baking soda and vinegar. And then one day she goes to, we start a new grade, and she comes back, and I'm like, let's do science. And she's like, that's not science. Don't you know science is like a method where you have to have a hypothesis and all this stuff? I was like, dude, I just want to put some, food coloring in with some bubbles. But I felt humiliated. I felt like, actually, she showed up and was like, actually, this friend that I used to have fun with. But she was right. That doesn't mean that she understood it. It means somebody told her that it was true, and she accepted it and memorized it. I doubt at 5 years old or 6 years old, she had put into practice enough to actually understand the reasons why the scientific method is, the way that it is, and why it is a specific, sequence of things that you have to do, including like proposing a hypothesis, which is you're proposing a goal already. The goal is, do I prove this true or false? And it's you have to place everything into a context of a goal. Scientific discoveries are made by accident sometimes, but the scientific method is a specific process, and so is thinking. Instead of actually, it's a simple mistake that people do when they regurgitate information, thinking that they know what they're saying. I just need to start putting in the work. I'm working on a Winnebago, and I don't know any wiring, any electrical, and I need to learn how this stuff, and I need know I have the drive and the will and capability. I just need to start putting in the work. Yeah, you do. This year I moved to Texas, and they have freezes that make power go out, and apparently it goes out in the summer when it's really hot, in the winter when it's very cold. And I was like, I want a generator. And I thought, okay, get a generator, whatever, pour gasoline into it, turn it on, plug things in, you're good. No. Okay. There's so much involved with understanding how to safely and effectively use a generator and picking the right generator for your situation. And I wanted one that you could hook up to eventually I learned like the different possibilities and what I had to think about what my goal was. And I spoke to the guy who's my mentor in zoology as well. And he is just a generally like very self-sufficient person. And he was like, what do you want to run? What is, if the power goes out, what is it that you want to power? You can't just say, I want a generator if the power goes out. It's like, what devices do you want to be able to supply power to? And that then you can calculate how much power you need to make. Okay. Also, do you have natural gas line? Do you have, or do you want to use propane, or do you want to use gasoline? It's like, do you want a generator that can use all three? And there's different reasons for choosing each one. And I figured out I wanted to use one that uses natural gas because I wanted to hook it up to the natural gas line, and I didn't have to go every 6 hours during a crisis to drive to get more gasoline, because you can't store gasoline. It goes bad, and it's also really dangerous. You can't store that much of it for very long. And propane you can, but how much propane can you store if you don't have like a giant tank built into your property, like 6 hours at a time, something like that. That's not good. I don't want to be going back and forth to fight people at, the gas station for the last propane tank during a power outage. So I wanted something that could go with the natural gas line. And there was other reasons too, but that now I have to learn about natural gas and how to hook it all up and deal with that safely. I had to learn the different ways to hook up the generator safely, which involved learning a lot about wiring and the dangers of it. You can kill somebody by misusing a generator, and not just like people in your house. Like if you are backfeeding electricity into the wiring of your house, because that's how you decide to, power things, is you're not powering them individually. You want to power the whole house. If you do that incorrectly and you don't have the right electrical setup, you will feed power into the power lines. And then when the lineman comes to try and fix the power outage, he can get shocked and die. So it was so much I had to learn. And I actually learned it because I had a goal. And I learned about all of this stuff to some degree in various classes throughout my life, and situations, I guess. You learn about electricity, and I've wired things before, but I've never had to think about feeding current versus just like pulling current. It's a different thing, but your goals will they determine whether or not you are competent, because they contextualize whether or not you are successful. Because you understand something sufficiently enough. What you can't even claim I understand physics. What do you understand about physics? Nobody understands everything about physics. What do you understand about physics? And if you're going to really understand physics, it's because you tried to figure out a problem. You had a goal that was real. You didn't memorize stuff and get an A+ on your physics test. I've never taken a physics class. I'm not going to claim to understand all physics or anything like that, but I definitely have an intuition for certain physical issues in physics, and that comes from me trying to figure out real problems, and not because I took a physics class. I've never taken a physics class, but I have listened to a lot of Sean Carroll lectures. They taught me, the standard model. I'm sure Dave Farina could probably make a video about that too. He probably has one. But, who is a scientist? Who is a physicist? Pick one. Somebody who publishes papers? Okay, then guess what? If that's the definer, then that's fine. But now I don't care that somebody is called a physicist or whether or not somebody's called a scientist. I care, are they doing something? Are they doing are they engaging with and constructing or trying to understand and figure out, the answer to some problem in the field? That's it. It's like, who's a baker? Somebody who went to culinary school has their license or whatever you get, or somebody who bakes. Somebody who bakes. That's a baker. Um, you don't have to be professionally a baker to be a baker. You can be a baker at home and be the best baker in the world still. Okay. So when we're talking about good faith, if you assume that somebody has bad intentions and you're just going to, I don't want to, if you, let's say you're even right, and you're just going to attack them, that's not science. And you should be, if you really care about science, you shouldn't, then you should be focused on trying to advance it by propping up people who you think are doing good work, because you actually understand what they're doing to some degree, not entirely, but like to some degree, enough to recognize, or at least, have an assumption that's firsthand, that what they're doing is valuable, not just because they are, they have tenure at, an Ivy League school, but because you thought about their ideas deeply, and you've listened to them enough, and that you're like, yeah, that actually makes sense with this stuff that I have an understanding of firsthand. And so now I'm going to highlight them. Dave doesn't do that, actually. He talks about things that he doesn't focus on anyone who's trying to do anything groundbreaking. And that's fine. But again, like, recognize the limits of your ability to judge. I say on here that, like, the most, I've thought about this before, it's like, what is the most general and kind of universal definition of what it means to be competent, or like a competent person? Not competent at this or that, but a competent person. And the answer is, somebody who's generally competent is somebody who recognizes what they are and aren't competent at. Who is competent at recognizing what they are competent and what they are not competent at. That starts with recognizing the limits of your ability to judge something, which is, requires understanding that you must have firsthand experience with something in order to truly have any possibility of truly understanding it. You have to. Like, first principles requires starting from first person first. And that's not taught in school, because why would they teach you that? They're trying to teach you about, like, things that are institutionally accepted, not how to think for yourself. And it doesn't have to be like a grand conspiracy to be true. It's just is. But this right here, good faith. I know we've made very little progress on these clips, but I'm going to go through it.
It's a liar. And GU is nothing but smoke and mirrors for tricking the science illiterate. Complete clarity that Eric is a liar, and GU is nothing but smoke and mirrors for tricking the science illiterate public into thinking that he's a genius. But first, let's set the stage a little bit. That brutal interaction on Peer.
First of all, genius is a moment. It's not a person. That's an assumption that's incorrect about that Dave is making, is that there are geniuses, and that's not true. And this also, when you are calling somebody a liar, that is a huge claim. And it's also a claim that requires you to have firsthand understanding of their goals and motives, which means, like, you need to know them personally. You must know them personally. If you don't know them personally, you can't actually know whether or not somebody is a liar. Dave calls everybody who is, claims that the institutional narrative that is currently accepted within some scientific field, or by, academia, anybody that pushes back about and kind of states that there's not just some misunderstood concept here or there, but that there's a fundamental issue in even whether or not our scientific community understands what it means to understand the field that they're in. Anybody who states anything remotely close to that is called a liar and a con artist by Dave. It is just like apparent. You can go and see it firsthand. You should, if you don't believe me, especially. And if you do believe me, but you should still, like, don't just take my word for it. But I don't think he would even deny it. It's in hundreds of videos. It is not truthful to say. I'm not going to say that Dave is a liar, but because I don't know whether or not he knows what he's doing. And if he knows that he doesn't know, but he just wants to say it, then that's really dishonest. But I don't know him personally, so I'm not going to claim whether or not he's lying or he's being dishonest or not. But what he is saying is not truthful. It's not, because in order to know it's true, you have to know them personally. Assuming people's motives is really difficult to avoid, but it's very important, especially in science, which is it's not just something. Like I said, science it's a collective narrative. It's not just a personal endeavor. It's a bunch of personal endeavors coming together into a collective narrative, feeding into a collective narrative. But it's individuals who actually advance science forward, and then because there can only be one head of some snake at a time. Well, some snakes have two heads, but that's a whole nother debate. Is it two snakes with one body, or is it one snake with two heads? I don't know. It's probably two snakes with one body. Maybe actually, like, we need a new way to describe it. I think about these things sometimes, but this is the point is that there can only be one. To advance requires leadership, and like there can only be one leader on any specific topic at a time. So it's individuals that push science forward. Really, I mean, it's groups that sometimes prove ideas that have been proposed by individuals, but an idea is almost always, if not always, the product of an individual. Groups don't have ideas. Groups can work together to figure out how to prove or disprove or confirm some results, experimentally, that support some idea or falsify some idea, but that idea came from an individual. And so, I've talked about this before. This girl who worked at DeepMind, who I got into a big debate with once on Clubhouse a long time ago. She said to me that she just didn't like that I was claiming that some things about AGI that were not the establishment narrative in the field. And AGI, I mean, I don't like the term, but whatever. And she was like, it's not going to happen because some, person makes some, unique and individual, has some unique and individual understanding. It's going to take a bunch of really smart people who were really passionate and were working really hard together to kind of figure this stuff out. And I was like, no, that's where you work. So like, to disbelieve that is to disbelieve in what you are doing every day, for your career. So, I mean, why would I expect somebody who has dedicated themselves to to being in that type of environment? I'm not saying she's refuses to accept the truth because it would, delegitimize her life choices. I'm saying that she made those life choices because of what she believes, and I think what she believes is false. Groups do not make scientific progress. Groups confirm ideas, and that is scientific progress, but it's not. You need an individual to propose, a theory that is different from the norm before that happens. So, but calling somebody a liar is not good faith. And that's not good science. It is not. If you truly think somebody is a liar, you need to provide evidence of it. Like, and you would have evidence if you knew them personally and you knew they were lying. Like, you would have the receipts. And I'm not saying you shouldn't ever call somebody out for lying. Everybody lies. This is another fallacy, I guess. I hate that term, but still, that Dave does a lot. Is there are no liars and truth tellers. There are people, and they all lie sometimes, all of us, and they all tell the truth sometimes. And we should all try and tell the truth as much as possible, as kindly as possible. But everybody lies. And so same thing with, again, there are no geniuses and idiots. There are genius moments and idiotic moments that we all have. And there are no liars and honest people. There are people, and they sometimes lie, and they sometimes tell the truth. And you can't know the difference unless you personally know them. Otherwise, you're just taking your own assumptions for whatever, which you're assuming for whatever reason you're assuming them. But whatever those reasons are, they don't allow you to know whether or not that's true unless you personally know them. And same thing with, judging whether or not somebody is telling the truth. You don't know, but you should assume they are if you're going to engage with them. Otherwise, I don't engage with people who I think are liars. I did it. I try not to engage with people who I think, when I think they're lying. That's a much better way of putting it. It's a much more honest and humble way of putting it. Saying I don't engage with liars. That's not true. But for so many reasons, it's even like the idea that there are liars out there is in and of itself not true. And also, do you engage with people who are lying? The idea that you don't ever is not true. But I try not to engage with people who I think are lying or who I know are lying, unless I'm calling them out for it. Because what's the point? Why play a game with somebody who is going to cheat when you're not going to? And if you're going to cheat and they're going to cheat, then why even play the game? It's like you both have to be assumed to be following the rules, or else there's no reason to play at all.
Morgan from late May was seen by almost 1 million people, and my commentary on the interaction was also seen by almost 1 million people. Eric was very much the laughingstock of the internet that week, and he needed to come up with some damage control as quickly as possible. But who was going to help him spin cycle? Everyone knows GU is nothing, so who can help Eric continue to pretend that it's something?
This statement of everyone knows GU is nothing. I think GU is something. I'm not saying that everything about it is accurate. When you're proposing something novel, the hardest part is figuring out how to describe it using existing terms and within an existing context. Very difficult, by the way. It's not even really possible. You have to kind of move the entire culture, kicking and screaming, by showing confirmable results and usefulness of what you're proposing, into accepting new paradigms that were not currently accepted, because you need a true context. And if you accept true contextualizing, constraints of any kind of structure that you're trying to understand, it's kind of like you already see the picture. If you ask the right question, you kind of will a lot of times get an answer, like especially a philosophical question. If you ask the right question, it will answer itself. By the time you ask the question, you're like, okay, now I know the answer. But I couldn't answer it before because I didn't ask the right question. What's the definition of life? Do you have free will, or is the universe deterministic? Like, these are bad questions, and they're the wrong questions. They have false assumptions built into them. How do you tell somebody that the whole question is wrong? Not just, here's my answer. It's, you do have free will. Oh no, actually, don't you know that physics shows that it's all deterministic? Don't you know that actually there's non-determinism, or and that quantum mechanics is probabilistic? Like, people just go on and on and on, and it's because the whole question is wrong, and the words that are being used is wrong. Free will and determinism are codependent and co-defining of each other. You cannot have one without the other, but you need a totally new, honestly, theistic framework in order to like have the context that makes it obvious why that is the case. If the context is assumed to be different, for than is required to actually understand the answer, like, then good luck trying to convince somebody of the answer without the context. This is where we're at with physics. This is where we're at with way more than physics. This is where we're at with morals. This is where we're at with politics. This is where we're at with nationality and socioeconomics and speciation and taxonomy. Even, I mean, the whole field of taxonomy is falling apart. Species doesn't mean anything anymore. It used to mean two animals that could not produce viable offspring, or fertile offspring themselves if they were bred together. That doesn't mean, that's not the working definition anymore, and it is still the dictionary definition. It's not the working definition. There is no definition anymore, because, like, there's only one definition that you can use that maintains coherence for any word, that maintains coherence and also is not redundant, and therefore it, like, actually has a meaning to it, like an actual meaning. So what that really means is that there's only one definition for a word that is correct, like truly correct, because you can use another definition, one of two different definitions, but one of them makes the word not worth having. So why even try to define a word that we already have a word for? A word for a concept that we already have a word for. It just doesn't make sense. So anyways.
He has only two options here. The first is Curt Jaimungal. Curt already did a 3-hour-long video doing his best to make GU seem like a real theory, almost certainly on Eric's dollar, but after the humiliation Sean served him, it was time for more drastic measures. Curt put out another 3-hour video, this time interviewing Eric.
Why are you nervous?
You're formidable. Sean Carroll doesn't make me as nervous as you do, and he's hostile and you're not.
That's right. Curt is about to lick Eric's balls for longer than the runtime of any Lord of the Rings extended edition, and not a physicist Curt is way smarter and cooler than stupid real physicist Sean. So disregard the Piers video entirely. This puff piece is where it's really at. Oh yeah, and Sean is super hostile because he sat there quietly and politely while Eric spewed his bullshit script. And once it was his turn to speak, he calmly informed the viewers that Eric is a con man propping up a fake paper and pretending it's a revolutionary theory of everything. But don't worry, Curt isn't hostile at all. He's just there for the ball licking and the artificial inflation of Eric's persecution complex. What do you think Curt's netting here? 10 grand? 20? Eric is loaded and desperate, so I bet Curt made out pretty well on this one.
I'm not trying to reveal like any personal stuff about like the specifics of this because it's Curt's business, but I will tell you this: Curt is very dedicated to what his mission is. I'm not going to define his mission here because that's for him to define, but he's definitely not for sale. That's what I will say. And I know that. Because not only do I know it because he told me, I know it because he told me, and I also saw it reflected in certain actions that he took, like that I saw him take, that I can prove, but I'm not going to get, it's not my place to get into it. But I know, and I'm not saying you need to take my word for it, but I have the context to know that what Dave is promoting here is not true, which is just this idea that Curt is for sale and that he is propping up Eric for money. I don't know if Eric paid him or not, but I know that he didn't do it for the money. That I know. Because he has a record that is provable. Whether or not he wants to prove it to everybody is his business. But I know that it's true that he is not doing this for the money. Money is important. It helps us live. It is his full-time job. But Curt knows that he could make way more money if he just did things a little differently. And then he has chosen to do them. And he chooses to do it otherwise. I know how to make money on YouTube, I'm not saying I could, net millions of dollars off of it or anything, but I know how to get views. I don't pursue it because that's not the goal of this channel. I wouldn't do 4-hour-long live streams at 11 p.m. Central Time if my goal was to maximize my views so that I can get, AdSense money. By the way, there's no super chats probably turned on this. I don't know. Whatever the default setting was last time, maybe there are. You can check. If there is, you can super chat me. But I usually don't turn it on because I don't want to annoy people with ads while they're watching my videos. Eventually I do turn it on, but it takes, after like a week or something. And I've made like $300 in 4 years? I'm not doing this for the money or the views at all. But I do have goals for this channel, and it's to engage with people who are engaging with concepts that are relevant to what I'm engaging with. That is the goal of this channel, and to present my work. That's it. I can do that without millions of views. Dave says, "Oh, this debate was seen by millions of people, where Eric was humiliated." So, is that something to celebrate? Is that good? Even if you think Eric's wrong, is that good? What is good about that? It's just school teacher nonsense. And, artificial authority. Like, true leadership and true authority is not, doesn't need to, you don't need to humiliate somebody in order to have authority. Authority is like, it's like in dog training, it's like true dominance is the ability to control the space. It is the ability to control the narrative, and controlling the narrative does not mean getting lots of views. Controlling the narrative can sometimes mean advancing the narrative slowly, but advancing. And it is advancing. Curt is advancing the narrative, and Dave is not. Dave is not. And Curt isn't, he's not somebody who proposes his own work that much, but he promotes other people's work who he thinks, is doing interesting and groundbreaking work. And that advances the narrative, especially when you're having people on who aren't already accepted into the narrative. And Dave has a big problem with that, and he talks about it openly. So I'm not just making assumptions about that are unfounded. He openly admits this. So, that is, if you really want science to advance, then you cannot just defend blindly the establishment. And that is what Dave is doing here. You know how I know that's true? Because he admits in this video, and he at least claims in this video that he isn't able to understand physics at the level that he could even judge geometric unity or any other groundbreaking physics work. He claims that groundbreaking physics work cannot be understood by anybody who isn't, a physicist at like Sean Carroll, or an accredited physicist like Sean Carroll. It's just nonsense. Somebody said this to me too. They said, when I first started talking in this physics group, and I was like trying to say that I thought I understood some things in geometric unity. And guess what? I actually do. Not everything, but like there are some things that I assumed about it that ended up being true. That is a fact. Like Eric and I agree that the universe is like extraordinarily constrained to the point where there's like only one way to make a universe. I've spoken to him about it, so I know that that's true. That was something I deduced myself, not something I heard him say and I was like, oh, he's so smart, so I'm just gonna believe him. But Dave says here, oh, Eric's point in this is he's proposing his work, and it's just to trick people, which you don't know his motives. Again, you can't. That's the point. It's even if you're right, you cannot know whether or not if your assumption is true. That's the real point. If your goal is the truth and actual understanding, which anybody who claims to have a passion for advancing and preserving the integrity of scientific pursuit should have that as their goal. And that's it. Like, you don't prop up the establishment blindly. If you agree with the establishment narrative because you understand it firsthand, then defend it. But if you don't understand it, why are you defending Sean Carroll? And how can you know that he wiped the floor with Eric? And how can you know that geometric unity is nothing and also just a trick to trick people who are scientifically illiterate into thinking that they can understand, the groundbreaking physics work. I said that I thought that I understood a couple things in geometric unity because they aligned with my own work, and not everything, but a couple things. And these people who had degrees in physics and math in this Discord that I was involved with years ago, they mercilessly mocked me. Oh, you think that you understand, like, can understand Eric's super complicated theory of physics? And they believed that it was true because they thought Eric was really smart at the time. And I think that's, like, most of them don't like Eric anymore. But at the time, they were idol worshiping him a little bit. And they assumed his work was just so groundbreaking, so complicated, and that you couldn't possibly understand it unless you had a degree, a PhD in physics or math, which all of them had, by the way, and they did not understand it. And they openly admitted that. They were like, we're trying to figure it out. I'm like, well, if you can't figure it out, then why would you say that you need a PhD in math and physics to figure it out? If that was the case, why don't you understand it? No, maybe you're just not contextualizing things properly. And there's lots of issues involved with why it is hard to understand geometric unity. That's for another video, for some people, not for all people. There is a context in which every, like, true theory that is true enough in its, proposed structures will become intuitive, but you have to have the right context. And the issue is we don't have the right context, and I don't think Eric has done a very good job at like explaining the context. That's what I would love to see him do, but that's hard sometimes for many reasons. But these proposals, these assumptions that Dave, I'm assuming, has, because I have to assume he's telling the truth. Otherwise, why would I engage with this? It means he doesn't realize the limits of knowledge. And you know why? Because you don't understand the limits of your understanding if you're not allowed to learn how to think, because you have spent all your time trying to memorize shit in school. That's just fact. And that is his whole thing. It's his whole thing. He makes videos about things that other people have discovered or deduced, and establishment narratives on fields that he does not have a firsthand understanding of, as far as, engaging with them with a personal goal, within the context of a personal goal. He has a master's degree, which I don't believe that any of these credentials matter, but especially a master's degree in science education. What the hell is science education? That sounds like that is as nonsensical as people think gender studies is. And a reality is like, gender studies, it could be very legitimate and fundamentally true if it was taught differently, but that's not really what it's taught. And it's about, the history of our political narrative surrounding gender dynamics. It's not about, like, the fundamentalities of gender. Because if you did that, then you would realize that there's only one way things can be, because everything's extremely constrained. You couldn't do science, by the way, if Eric wasn't right about the universe thing, about how the universe is extremely constrained and how, in how it is constructed. If that wasn't true, we could not do any quote unquote science. We couldn't logically deduce things. We couldn't use mathematics or geometry really to, or even algebra, but especially geometry to make predictions, like structural predictions. We couldn't use language because language requires like certain constraints about deterministic constraints in order to concretize meaning. Like all of this stuff would be impossible. Understanding anything would be impossible if Eric was wrong. And by the way, this is something that I'm pretty sure very much did. This is you could say geometric unity in some ways is the opposite of what Sean Carroll's many worlds prediction is, which I believe Sean Carroll believes that there's potentially infinite possible universes, and each one can have different laws of physics, or if certain interactions happen in this universe, it causes the universe to split, and then there's different universes made, and certain choices that we make, all kinds of different contexts. I've heard him talk about, I don't know which ones he actually subscribes to, but I've heard him, talk about all these concepts as if they're legitimate possibilities. I will at least say that. That there could be a universe with any kind of laws of physics. I mean, he says this in this video that he blocked me on Twitter for making, where he said, if you believe that God is a necessary being to the creation of the universe, all I need to do is to invent a universe in which God does not exist. And he doesn't even realize that, like, he's playing as God in this model. Like, he didn't get rid of the concept of a conscious creator, of an intentional being, of a being with an intention and a goal, and making a choice to create at all. Like, he's kind of go try and make a universe without, go find a universe that nobody made, and nobody made. Go make a universe without making the choice to make a universe. I mean, you can't. You can't. And I showed that this was just, he didn't realize that he was kind of disproving his own proposal. And but the fact that he proposed it means that he thinks that there's all these different possible universes that if we can construct them conceptually, which that's the one example that he used, by the way, is the one that you cannot construct conceptually. He was like, a universe in which there's just one particle, just one, and that's the universe that I've made, and it just exists, that particle, and therefore, and there's no God, so therefore, God doesn't need to exist as a necessary being. There's not a causal requirement for a conscious creator. Not realizing he's the conscious creator in the equation. I showed this, and he blocked me on Twitter for it. But that he showed this is, in some respects, different from what Eric is proposing. And I know Eric calls himself an atheist, but the point is that, like, he would and has asserted that it appears like there was not a lot of choice in the laws of the universe for God, if there is a God, at least. And, that question, that's the answer he, proposes to the question that Einstein asked. And I think Eric's right. And that means that Sean is wrong. Thinking about that is doing physics, by the way. You're thinking about causality. You're really thinking about it. You're really engaging with it. You have a goal. You want to try and figure out what is logically, backed up within certain contexts. Like, Dave doesn't do any of this, yet he's going to tell you that everybody, including him, knows GU is nonsense. How? He can't know that. That's what I'm trying to get at and convey here. It's impossible. I'm not calling him a liar or anything like that. I'm saying, I'll assume he doesn't realize what he's doing, just like Sean doesn't realize what he's doing. And part of this is we have definitional problems and our language is unraveling. And has been for a while. But language is contextualizing of, the questions that you can ask, and therefore the answers that you can get. And if you've misdefined God and you don't realize you're God in the equation, you're gonna not be able to actually make an argument that supports what you're trying to assert. In the case of Sean Carroll, at least, and the universe that doesn't require God. But he says that a universe in which there's one particle that exists and it just never changes, and that's just the way that it is. With like, not even getting into what the heck is this particle that he's chosen. What is that really? That's not the point. Even though it is something that you have to contend with if you're going to be a real physicist, or a real philosopher or metaphysicist, especially. He's just wrong. Would Dave I wonder if Dave would hear this, and if he was like honest with himself, would he recognize what I'm saying or not? Like, I don't know. But like, you can try to do this, and if you don't want to try and do this, then don't speak about it as if you understand it. Don't make claims. You can talk about it, but don't make claims. Don't call people liars if you don't know them personally. It means, it means you're the one that's not telling the truth. Doesn't mean you're lying. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it means that you're not telling the truth. And by the way, I don't know Eric's net worth. I will just say this. I have no idea how much Eric is worth. I've heard him say things that indicate that he is not worth probably nearly as much as Curt. Not as much as Curt, as much as Dave assumes. But because he works for Peter Thiel, Dave assumes that Eric is like absolutely loaded. And he might have, but Dave literally states in this video that Eric is worth like $100 million. Like, he says that he's worth like over $100 million. I would be shocked if that was the case. And it might be the case, but I would be shocked if that was the case. I just wonder why he would state that. Working for a billionaire does not make you rich. I have family members that work for Amazon. They work for, the second richest man in the world or whatever. Like, they make very little money working for that guy. And I realize it's a little different, but it's not, though. It doesn't matter how much Eric is worth, but it is just odd. It does seem, if I were to guess, I think that, I don't know. I don't care to guess how much money he has, but what I will say is that I don't think that Dave's assumptions about this whole incentive structure that he's assuming to exist of just a desperate guy who has hundreds of millions of dollars, who works for a billionaire, whose sole goal in life is to destroy our scientific institutions for the sake of just greedy and selfish power. Like, I think that's just not a realistic viewpoint of the world. Some people do act maliciously, but there's so many things wrong that doesn't seem true about that. I'm not saying that you have to agree with Peter Thiel's decisions or Eric's. It doesn't matter. But like, this whole construction that he has in his head seems false. And I know at least that enough to know that part of it is false, because Curt isn't doing this for the money, and that's like downstream from all of this. I also work with a lot of like people who are influencers, very, very famous ones too. And some of them have a lot of money, and you can certainly make a lot of money. Most of them have brand deals. I don't know of any brand deals that Eric Weinstein has. The portal isn't going on anymore. And so there's just because you're famous doesn't, I don't even want to say famous. I don't think Eric is famous. He's getting there though. Like, if fame means anything, it means like you are known by people all over the world. No, and it's not dependent upon like your niche. Like Eric is very known by anybody who is like scientifically focused and or politically, focused, or physics focused. But like, is he just known by some random girl who just cares about fashion? No, probably not. You have to be known outside your niche, or you have to have a niche that's like universal, which is like Tom Cruise. He's famous. Everybody likes movies. Movies isn't a niche, but physics and math is a niche. Anyways, I mean, even just calling out like how much somebody's worth, it just doesn't matter how much Eric is worth. It's just not. Like if you're judging based on whether or not he could be totally right. Geometric unity could be completely true, and it could literally allow us to go to Alpha Centauri in like a second. I don't know, whatever, or go backwards. Travel to different times. How we talk about this, who knows? But it could allow for that, and be that true that it allows for that. If he paid people to promote it, why does that matter at that point? If it wouldn't matter if he paid people to promote it if it was true, then it doesn't matter if he paid people to promote it even if it's false. Which means just doesn't matter, the payment. This is very important. I'm not just trying to grift off of gossip. We have to learn how to be humble, which means honest with ourselves and about ourselves. And in a scientific context, that means honest with ourselves and about ourselves insofar as our ability to, and the limits of our abilities to actually know what is true and what is not. Not think, know. And also to be able to judge what is relevant and what is not. Like, money is not relevant. Working for Peter Thiel, not relevant. Like, not. What's relevant is it true? What is there truth in it? It's not going to be completely true. What does that even mean? But is it true enough to where it is able to kind of confirm core goals of, involved with geometric unity? An explanation for triality, an explanation for the perception of chirality, logically at least, try and see if the arguments seem to hold. Does it seem to allow for the ability to navigate additional degrees of freedom in space-time? Like, that is something that maybe eventually can be tested if the aliens let us. If the Greys let us, I'll say. I don't know where they're from, but the point is like, that's what matters. So I defend, people will be like, you're defending your friend, blah, blah, blah. No, I am defending my friend because I know that what Curt is saying, that Curt is not doing this for the money and is not just bought and paid for by people who are trying to push their ideas. You know how many people try and push their ideas and get on Curt's podcast? Endless amounts. You know how many people think that they have figured out the secrets of the universe? And by the way, most of these people have figured out something true about the universe that is not part of currently accepted by science. It might be something that a lot of people have figured out and that is not really, that profound of an idea, even if it's not currently accepted, because it's been assumed by many people over time for a long time. Like consciousness is fundamental, or sentience is fundamental. Everybody so many people, not everybody, but so many people think that they have, they have some theory that suggests that. And I think that that's because that's true, that my work is one of those. But I know that people approach me because I know Curt, and they ask me to help them get on Curt's podcast. That's how many people try and get on Curt's podcast. And they tell me that they're willing to pay. I don't even pass some of these people on because I assume that they've already approached Curt, and I don't follow their work enough to endorse it. And also, like, if he's gonna do it for money, then like he'll accept their money, but he doesn't because those people don't end up on the podcast. So, it's not about money. So I'm defending my friend because I know what's true. If I knew my friend was doing something it was bought and paid for, I would just, I don't know, maybe I would be like, yeah, and I would confirm it, but then I wouldn't have a friend anymore. So, if I wanted to keep that friend, I'd probably just keep quiet, but just being honest. But you don't just defend your friends because they're your friends. You should only defend your friend when you know that they're right, or that what somebody's saying about them is false. Otherwise, don't defend your friend. Your friend does something wrong, don't defend them. You can be their friend without defending them. So this is this right here. This is also
complete clarity that Eric is a liar and GU is not.
Hold on. This right here is important. And this just shows like Dave doesn't get it.
I'm nervous for the right reasons, because we're actually going to have a conversation, and I never have a conversation.
Eric, literally all you do is have conversations. Your only job, your entire purpose in life, is to go on podcasts and have never-ending conversations with whoever will listen to your bloated bloviations, where you pretend to be the world's leading expert on literally every topic. That you got called out by Sean for not being able to write a real paper, and your response is to just have another 3-hour-long conversation on YouTube, doing nothing but whining about how physics is lost and nobody will take you seriously, is quite telling. We're not going to dissect either of these marathon-length videos, since it would serve very little purpose, and ain't nobody got time for that. But check out Eric's next move. Remember when I...
This is very important, what just happened. Multiple things just happened. One is, you don't realize unless you are actually engaging with this. And I say this in my Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide video that was on the Curt's Pace 1 contest, which is linked below. Like, I say that unless you are actually engaging with trying to like construct a fundamental model, you don't understand all these things that are unique about it. That come along with that endeavor. And one of those is here. Maybe I can show it. Well, it's just that it's very difficult to discuss it with people, like I said earlier, because the context doesn't exist yet for you to propose it. You have to build the context, which people are going to have to assume for the sake of argument, and it's not going to match with what we currently know, because otherwise we would already have this worked out. And which, like, if somebody's going to entertain your ideas, but they haven't done the exact things that you've done personally, then they have to assume something for the sake of argument in order to even start engaging. And that they don't currently assume, by the way. Like, that's not just like some idea that's easy for them to accept. It's going to be something that is contra to what they currently accept. And then you have to figure out a way to discuss it on there. When Eric says, like, I very rarely have a conversation, I understand exactly what he means, even though it seems like Dave doesn't. What he means is that he goes on all these podcasts and he just gets to all these interviews, and nobody is actually able to ask the right questions about geometric unity and able to discuss like things about it that are, specific and technical and aren't nitpicky, like linguistic differences or whatever. Like, you use this, a Lagrangian, like this, and this is not what physicists usually mean when they say Lagrangian. You use the word quantum, and like physicists, they really mean something very specific, and that's not how you're using it. This is all not helpful, and it's not a conversation. And even asking people about, like, asking Eric again and again, like explain the history of string theory. You know, why do you think that this is happening? All these things are not. It just starts to be not a conversation. It is just people are doing an interview and they're asking the same questions as other people for the most part. And Eric is saying the same thing every time. And he knows what he's going to say every time. And he knows the questions that he's going to get every time. That's not a conversation. A conversation is two-way. It's not one way. I ask these questions. You give these answers. I don't push back. It's like nobody has the ability to even truly challenge. And I don't mean challenge in terms of like being an opposition to, but truly engage with geometric unity. I think other than very, very, very few people, probably some people privately who are working physicists and maybe some mathematicians, and also Curt, because he has some academic background with it that lets him, speak the language, and also an enormous, like, incredible work ethic to try and understand, things that take a lot of work to try and understand. and he did it, And so when he goes and he creates these 3-hour-long videos of an iceberg on geometric unity, trying to explain his best to explain what he thinks geometric unity is, and that you think that that's useless to go over. And if you're going to talk about like whether or not Eric's theory is legitimate or not, you're going to say that it's not worth watching a 3-hour-long lecture on something that you claim that if it was true would be extraordinarily groundbreaking. And, you would probably assume that Dave assumes that would be a complicated thing to try and understand. Whether or not it's actually complicated in the right context is another thing, but whether or not it would take a lot of context and a lot of rigor to understand all that context. If you're not you're not so familiar with so much of the of the concepts and structures in physics already. Yeah, it's a 3-hour-long video. That's pretty quick, actually. I've watched Sean Carroll's 3-hour-long physics lectures. It's you want to understand a topic, like you need to dive in. If you're going to make claims about whether or not something's legitimate or not, you can't put 3 hours into it. I guarantee you that it took more than 3 hours for him to make this video about Eric. Editing, filming. I mean, it's an hour and a half of filming, and that's edited down, by the way. And it also involved planning the discussion that he has in this video and editing all that stuff. And I mean, this took potentially days, this video to make. And he's probably very good at quick at making videos because it's his job. But even if he is, this is a day project minimum. And it took days of planning minimum because he had to coordinate with another person. Is no way that this took less than 3 hours. He should have watched Curt's video on geometric unity if he is going to make claims about whether or not geometric unity is legit, whether or not everybody knows it or not, and about whether or not Curt is actually making legitimate effort to try and showcase and understand these Eric's ideas. But instead, he goes, "This isn't worth Curt's work. It's not worth watching," and basically saying it's not worth trying to understand geometric unity because it's fraudulent, and Curt is bought and paid for, so it's not worth trying to watch his 3-hour-long lecture or iceberg, trying his best to explain geometric unity as he understands it, and it's not worth watching any of these things because guess what? Because Eric is a liar and a con man who is worth hundreds of millions of dollars and just paid Curt off to promote these ideas. And it's all because of Peter Thiel. Like, this is the video. That's not a characterization or whatever that would be called. Like, that's not a straw man of what's happening. That is a steel man of what is happening in what Davis is pushing forward. Like, that's terrible. That is actually terrible. At the beginning of this, he shows a clip of Eric saying, Dave Farina, actually, like, legitimately, like, awful or something like that, or terrible act or something like that. And what was it? It was just like, oh, basically horrible or something. And he's saying it, I think, to Brian Keating. And that he is horrible, like in how he interacts with people. I don't remember the specifics, but he's saying something like that. It's true. Like, it's not, he doesn't say that's false. He says that, oh, it looks like I'm getting under his skin. Like, what are you, like a vindictive, like, girl or something? I don't know why you would act like that if your passion is, like, about promoting and explaining the truth. Professor David is supposed to explain. This is not explaining at all. It's legitimately awful. It's cruel, for one, which is totally unnecessary and not masculine. Kindness, benevolence is a masculine trait. Cruelty or vindictiveness is feminine. We think of it as the opposite in today's, but that's not true. I'm not saying that femininity is bad. That's not true at all either. Like, caring for somebody and like, is feminine too, but taken too far, it also makes you, like, mean sometimes. Objectification is like the negative form of masculine benevolence. It's like, benevolence can be kind. Why would I be cruel to you? And it can also be like objectifying, meaning, like, I don't care about you as a person. I'm just going to use you. That's the negative, like, manifestation of masculine benevolence. But there is negative manifestation of feminine and positive manifestation of feminine traits as well. And we all have both, but, like, try and be a man. Man up. Like, that's something that I think is a legitimate saying. And when I say, like, man up, it really means be kind. It does not mean, like, be a dick. I totally get, though, that Eric's not having very many conversations. Eric, like, Curt and him had such a conversation, by the way, that, like, there were parts of it that I just did not follow because I don't speak the language that I needed to speak in order to engage with that conversation and be a part of it. In that talk that they had, that's how they had a conversation. It's because there were things about it that, like, I'd have to go learn some stuff before I would be able to feel part of that conversation. But if you can just watch anybody go on a podcast and you feel like you're part of that conversation in every single thing that they are explaining, especially if they're, like, a physicist or something, then, which is, by the way, if Sean Carroll goes on a podcast, you feel like you are part of it all. Same thing with Michio Kaku and everything. And you walk away feeling like you were part of that. That is indicative, by the way, that they're not having a real conversation on that. They should be saying things that you don't get and you have to go look up and research if you're not, if you don't speak physics fluently. I will say this next clip is very interesting. I haven't fully digested it yet, but I'm going to come back to it at some point, so I'm going to show it.
So again, if we're evaluating this claim critically, is there really an explanation or prediction, as Eric claims? I would say no. It's essentially numerology. I mean, the reason why this 128 appears is because 2 to the power of 14 divided by 2 is 2 to the 7, which is 128. There's some weird numerical coincidences, and then he somehow gets some matter, and because of this numerology and a bunch of wishful thinking, he says, look, I get the standard model. It's wrong.
Sounds very Terrence Howardy.
Yeah, it's kind of similar. It reminds me of these weird, numerological things where people look at the book of Genesis and they say, okay, if you count the numbers of all of these things, it somehow predicts, the end of the world. That's the intellectual equivalent of what Eric is doing.
When he's using the term numerology, he just means it's fake. It's hocus pocus nonsense, fantasy stuff. That's how he's using the term. That's how most people use the term who are scientifically involved, I guess. I think numerology used to mean something very different, and it not fantasy. But you need context, and what it really means is like it's an attempt to understand how numbers and sequences can communicate information that is more than mathematical alone. It's about, that is relational, and that by the way, like, that is true. Like, that is, if people, the same people that say numerology is nonsense are the same people that say the universe is, math is the language of the universe. Oh, do you really believe that? Like, no, you don't even know what that means. Most people who say that don't even know what that means. They don't even think about it. Otherwise they'd probably say, they would stop saying numerology is nonsense. But what they think of as numerology is probably nonsense. But what would be an actual true definition of numerology, a definition for something that is true, which, by the way, why would you have a word for something that isn't true? Then that would not be what they think it is. It wouldn't be a synonym for nonsense, fairy tales. Like, somebody once, I've said this before, but somebody once asked me to try and use this as a gotcha to try and dismiss me. They said, do you believe in the paranormal? And I was like, well, that depends on what you mean by paranormal. There's two possibilities on what you could mean. You tell me which one it is, and then I'll tell you the answer. And they were like, no, you just answer the question. And I was like, I legitimately don't even know what the question is unless I have a definition of how you're using paranormal. And I was like, by paranormal, do you mean that which doesn't exist but is assumed to exist by people? That which people assume to exist, some people do assume to exist, but really doesn't exist? Or do you mean that which really does exist and is just not understood or incorporated yet into our scientific narratives? And I was like, you pick which one. By the way, if you've thought about that question just now, like, truly, you would realize there's only one answer. Why would I ever say, yeah, I believe in the paranormal if the definition of paranormal is that which doesn't really exist, but people assume that it does? Yeah, I believe that in that which doesn't exist, but a lot of people do believe that it exists. That's stupid. That is, like, if anything is stupid, that is stupid. And I don't even like that word, but, like, that is stupid. But the other answer is, yeah, I believe in that which is, that some things exist that are not yet understood and that are, currently beyond our understanding, our scientific understanding. How can you argue with that either? Do you believe that if you don't believe that, then you think we know everything. If that's true, then, like, I don't know what you should do with your life at that point. But you're definitely wrong. So there's literally only one answer, and even then, everybody would answer that answer. So it's like, why even ask the question? What this means is that the word paranormal is redundant, like, really redundant. Fundamentally, it's conceptually useful in one definition, according to one definition at least, but it is truly fundamentally redundant. There's no word that should ever, like, we already have an assumption that we don't know everything. We don't need a word. That I believe in that which I don't know yet, but that there's something out there. It's like saying, I believe that there's more. What did you just say? Nothing. That's the best you can do with the word paranormal. The worst you can do is, I believe in that which is fake. Like, nobody thinks about this. What this means is we don't think about, like, the definition of paranormal. We're just getting the definition from the context in which it's used. We're not having a consistent definition every time we use the word paranormal. That means your language is unraveling, by the way. But the people will say this about my work, is that it's numerology. And guess what? If, like, you really believe that that quantities and symmetry structures, that quantities that are intrinsic to the foundational formation of quantitative structures, which people who don't even think about this stuff, who are claiming to understand that, the math is the language of the universe, then it's inevitable. Like, if you make this claim, then you have to assume, and by the way, I don't even make this claim, that math is fundamental science, or that I don't even say math is the language of the universe. I don't know if I would even agree with that. Maybe music, honestly, if anything, which is, has geometry to it, but it's not mathematics, it's music. And when people say everything is mathematics, that's like saying everything is English. No, you can use English to describe like a lot of things. And you can use mathematics to describe a lot of things too. It's because it's a language. But we don't realize that. We think it's fundamental science in our dogma. But even if you did believe that, which I think is false, then the inevitable result is quantities and numbers have meaning because they're the foundation of information. That's just like, it seems inevitably true that numbers would convey meaning in when they are seen in certain contexts. But whether or not you understand that context and understand the meaning in that context, that's a whole nother conversation. You can never understand it at all. That doesn't mean you'll never understand it. Any instances of it, it just means like, don't be a number chasing guy, like the traditional numerology like caricature. You're just looking for patterns in the Bible. Now, if you see a pattern, acknowledge that you see a pattern, and then continue going on. But if you don't chase patterns that you don't have any context to, and you won't be able to understand what it means anyways, even if it does mean something. But he's using numerology to just mean nonsense. It means like Eric said, and you hear it. He doesn't have a definition of like what it means. There would be a reason why you would. I will say, I got 720 cells in my cosmological verse model. I was expecting that after learning some things about physics, and I didn't try to get it though. I figured it and deduced it, and it was exactly what I expected. And I actually almost didn't get it. I got 718, and for weeks I couldn't figure out how to get the other two. And if I was being dishonest, I would just make some structure that, added the other last two cells. That's not good though. That wasn't my goal. My goal wasn't to get 72. I expected it, but that wasn't my goal. My goal was to construct a model of a specific context. I realized I was missing a very key part of the context, and I put it in this model. I added to the context a little bit, and it scaled it to 7. It added the last two cells to 720. This guy would say that's just like numerology or something. Dude, like, how do you think, people deduce that there's like 4 dimensions to space-time, and that you think that it's just a pure coincidence that we observe 4 dimensions of space-time and 4 cardinal directions, and left, right, up, and down, and 4 chord songs are seen as complete, and we perceive stability as 4 legs on a table and a chair and 4 wheels on a car. You think that this is all just nonsense and that there's no reason for any of this? Then get out of science. You must believe in that there's a reason and for patterns. That doesn't mean you're right about their interpretation of them, but it just means like you must believe that there's a reason. If you believe that things are meaningless, that coincidences are meaningless, and that consistent patterns and quantities that keep popping up in certain contexts is just all coincidence, get out of science. Like, how else are you going to deduce and figure out any problems at all if you're not going to be recognizing and acknowledging of patterns? Stupid. I don't want to say that, but it is. It's numerology. That's not a freaking argument. You don't even have a definition of numerology. Um, again, I'm gonna speed through this because I don't know how long I've been going on this. I'm a little bit scared to even look. Oh my god, what time is it? How long, guys? 2.5 hours. Okay, we're gonna end this before 3 hours. That's like what my goal is lately. Is I don't want to go much more than 3 hours. But again, here.
That he not tell anyone that he was there. This is because they hoped to squeeze some money out of him without sacrificing their reputation by publicly affiliating themselves with a charlatan. Eric gets to feel like a real physicist for a day, and they hopefully get a pile of cash in return. It's like a Make-A-Wish Foundation sort of experience for Eric, but paid for out of his own $100 million net worth pockets instead of through donations to sick children. Apologies to Perimeter for spilling the beans. It's nothing personal. I'm just here to take out the trash.
If he knows somebody at Perimeter Institute that told him that, and who was the person who was involved with like inviting Eric and stipulating the conditions of this for and knew like the reasons behind it, like knew because they helped do this, organize this, and Dave knows it. Like you need to say someone at Perimeter Institute told me this, and then you say sorry for spilling the beans. You don't say sorry for spilling the beans without saying somebody told me this. Like you don't even have to say who they are. I'll take your word for it, but like, I doubt that that's what happened. I think he's just making an assumption, and that's also an assumption, but you know, be specific. Otherwise, like, don't leave room for an assumption if you're going to make a claim. And so, but I mean, I will say this, and I might be wrong, but like, if Eric's worth 100 million, like hundreds of millions of dollars, like good for him. That's great, but I would not have expected that. It doesn't matter to this, but it would be very surprising to me, I will say. You know, I mean, like I remember once he was like saying, you know, private jet isn't that great to Glenn Beck. And I've worked with Glenn Beck before. I've been to Glenn Beck's studio, and Glenn Beck gave me a private tour of his collection of like memorabilia. That guy has the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz, and I'm pretty sure he had the Gettysburg Address. He had the Gettysburg Address at this place. It was on loan to him by the government. They put it in a sealed room, and he showed it to us. We weren't even allowed in there, and they had to control the environment, and it was for some event. And then he had the cane from Jurassic Park, which is probably my favorite. If I could have any movie prop ever, like the amber cane, Hammond's amber cane, that would be pretty awesome. And he has that. Glenn Beck is loaded. If there is a level of wealth that is loaded, it's Glenn Beck, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I remember Eric was like talking to him in an interview once, and he's like, "Have you ever been?" He asked Glenn Beck, "Have you ever been on a private jet?" And I was sitting there like, dude, the guy has like, he buys anything he wants. There's nothing that is too expensive for him to buy that is not like a cruise ship. And Glenn Beck kind of chuckled, and he's like, "I have my own plane." And because Eric was saying it wasn't that great, and what Eric was missing is that like if you own a private jet, the convenience of it is that you leave exactly when you want, and you can go wherever you want, and you can change the destination mid-trip, and you don't have to go through any security, and you don't have to deal with any lines. That's all the like convenience of like, private jet. But if you're riding on somebody else's private jet, which Eric was like, I've ridden on people's private jets. It's like he doesn't have his own private jet, is what he was indicating. If you're riding on somebody else's private jet, you're on their schedule. It's like going to the airport maybe a little bit quicker because you don't have security, but like you still have to show up at this time, and you're going to this place, and the plane is more turbulent and scarier to ride in than a big jet, but maybe has more legroom. It's not that much better than it's honestly like the trade-off isn't worth it. If that often, it's like a novelty private jet if it's not your private jet. But if it's your private jet, it's probably different, I assume. I don't have a private jet yet. I'd love a private jet, but I'd want to fly my own. Yeah, if Eric has hundreds of millions of dollars, I feel like he would not fly commercial. You'd have a private jet. It'd be just that much more convenient. Maybe not, but like, you know, I would have my own private jet if I had $100 million. It might be a little one, but like I'd have one. Um, this guy who Dave had on is who actually, to his credit, he did one of his criticisms of geometric unity was that Eric's Hilbert space wasn't a true Hilbert space. It's like a proto Hilbert space or something. And I'm gonna play this because it was the one technical part of Dave's video, and it wasn't understood by Dave at all, and it wasn't stated by Dave. But I'm gonna put in there because that guy made a comment that seemed like it was in good faith, and so I'm gonna show it.
What he's referring to is something called just geometric quantization. And this Hilbert space that he talks about is not the actual Hilbert space of the quantum theory that he wants. There's some technical thing called a pre-quantization, and he either doesn't understand this or is intentionally conflating the actual Hilbert space of the quantum theory that he wants with this pre-quantum Hilbert space that is just not the same. So all you need to take away from that is that this kind of throwaway comment about geometric quantization doesn't save him. It's just misrepresented. It's just wrong.
I might be wrong on this. I will say that for the record. I'm pretty sure, though, I remember Eric actually stating somewhere that exactly what this guy is saying, which is that it's not exactly the same Hilbert space. I might be wrong again, but I think I remember this, and I don't remember where I saw it. But I will say, like, again, if you are proposing some novel idea, and you have to try and describe it with using our currently, our current context and our currently accepted and understood, hopefully, terms and concepts and ideas, you are limited, especially initially. You kind of have to build the context to describe your ideas, and that means people have to like be following along from the beginning, who are dedicated and just really just curious, not even dedicated. Yeah, I mean, I don't think Eric wants anybody to just accept his theory as genius. I mean, if he did, maybe I don't know, but like, I think but I have to assume the best, and if I assume the best, it is that he wants people to be curious enough to give it a legitimate shot, and that doesn't mean being like, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. I'm not going to say it's wrong because maybe it's right, and then you just walk away. No, if you understand anything about physics, or if you're curious about it, like, he wants people who are like that to be curious enough to, like, let's assume for the sake of argument there's something here. Let's try and figure out like what that would mean. And that's it, And a lot of people, there's very few people that are doing that, and almost none in the academic physics world that at least are doing it publicly. And part of it probably is because they don't want to be publicly criticized. I don't know. Some of them, I'm sure. But also, like, a lot of them just aren't. And I've seen that because they're honest about it. They're like, well, I've got my own stuff. Part of it is they don't understand what he's saying because it's novel. If you understood some concept that people stated immediately, like, if you think people understood general relativity right off the bat, that's probably false. If you think that people understood, like, any foundational model of in a scientific field, like, right off the bat, that's probably false. Like, it probably took building the context to get people to believe it, or reaching a technological ability that we could finally, like, show results that people couldn't ignore or that were useful, like building an atom bomb or something. Until you could split the atom and do nuclear fission, and for bombs and for power, and nuclear fusion for bombs, then there's just then it's just, it's your idea, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Like Teller, wasn't, what's his name? Oppenheimer didn't really believe in Teller's idea of fusion bomb, where you use a small fission bomb to basically, like, fuse the atom instead of just split it. And uh, and I don't know why. You know, you would think that if anybody had the context to see why that would work, it would have been Oppenheimer, but he was missing something. I don't know what, but he didn't believe in it for a while. But then eventually, like, there was no ignoring it because it worked. That's if imagine they never did that. They never, you know, detonated the fusion bomb on Bikini Atoll. It would still just be like, maybe it's true. You know, I don't know. It's there are lots of things that dictate whether or not an idea whether or not and when an idea whether or not an idea catches is dictated by whether or not it's true. When an idea catches is dictated by a lot of different things. But when I was talking about Peter Thiel earlier, like, just so you see that,
Yeah.
you know,
Last question. I mean, I've made several videos on Eric now, and my viewers know
so you just so you know, I'm not making assumptions about what this goes back to for Dave, in as far as his assumptions. Here you go.
tell my perspective on who Eric is, why he does what he does. You know, the connection with Peter Thiel. Do you have any differing opinions or additional perspective? Why is Eric the way he is? Why does he do what he do? What does Peter Thiel want? Why is he paying Eric to do this? Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's really not clear to me. I mean, it could be something like what you're saying, where for some reason these guys want to inject some sort of skepticism about science in the public. I don't really know to what end, what that would actually achieve. So it's possible that there's some nefarious ulterior motive going on. But my best guess is that there's nothing like that, and it's really just one of these misplaced genius complexes where he's honestly doing this because he thinks it's right, and he actually deep down wants to understand the universe, and he's just going about it in the wrong way. I mean, that would be my guess, but it's hard to know.
That's remarkably charitable of you.
Maybe too nice.
If that were true, he would have been pursuing physics all this time and tried to become more of a legitimate scholar instead of, and it doesn't even have to be done in a particular institution, but he would be doing that instead of doing money stuff with Peter Thiel. Yeah, to me, Thiel's agenda is crystal clear, but you know, I want to leave it open, you know, the possibility that I can also fixate on a narrative and then go down a rabbit hole, and you know, if somebody has some alternate perspective. But yeah, from where I stand, it's pretty obvious what Thiel is doing and trying to undermine the credibility of legitimate sources of information. Because if you can get somebody to ignore every scientist and every university and every legitimate institution, then you have a monopoly on their worldview, and then you have a monopoly on their voting behavior, and you have a monopoly on the masses and the behavior of the masses, essentially. So you can steer their consumer behavior, you can steer, as I said, their voting habits. So that's what I think is going on. And Eric, I will agree with you, maybe due to some of this interaction, like, it does sound like he has deluded himself into thinking that he is the genius that he portrays himself to be. So he's a little bit of like a, you know, it's half greed and half, you know, him buying his own sauce a little bit. But yeah, then that just makes him part pawn to Thiel, essentially.
Yeah.
I don't think Peter Thiel has anything to do with this. You know, I have a boss at my job, and it's different than this. He does not pay me to do this podcast. He doesn't pay me to pursue sentient singularity theory. And they don't even get it. Like, they know that it exists, but they don't know anything about it. They are bored, and you know, at least like they enough to where they, you know, they just look at Tyler's video, has a YouTube channel with 2 to 3 hour long videos and ranting about the things that, you know, the universe or something. Like, I'm not saying that's the extent of Thiel's like understanding of Eric's geometric unity, but the thing is that they do agree on, and if you actually listen to what Peter Thiel is saying, he's right. If you look at actually engineering and you follow engineering, like I said, I have a passion for aerospace technology, and I don't have a firsthand experience with trying to build an airplane, but I can see. I mean, I grew up at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base with the boneyard of every jet the Air Force has ever used, and I've seen basically everything that flies that, you know, is known. Our ability to build things is dramatically reduced compared to what it once was. Our technology has gotten better, so some things have become easier. It's easier to make a rocket engine a good rocket engine now than it was in the 1960s. But it took someone so much smarter to build a rocket engine in the 60s that does something half as well as a rocket engine as it would take somebody to build a rocket engine today that does something better than back then. Tech is a different is compounding. So it's not whether or not how good something is that you construct is not necessarily just reflective of your abilities, beyond that circumstance. You look at those rocket engines that they built in the 1960s and the jet engines, the amount of structures that they have in these pieces of engineering is mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. And I don't know how people did that for some of this stuff. It's amazing. They made the SR-71 before computers were even a thing, really. Like that's amazing. They had to figure out new ways to weld titanium, apparently. I didn't do it, so I don't know, but I have heard that that's the case. And it makes sense. Prior to that, why were you welding titanium to withstand that level of force and context? Never. But this is like, we haven't made anything that is, we couldn't do that today. Like we do amazing things today, but we're building on the backs of the people of the past in a way that is not the same as it's always been, like people say that's always been like that. No, our physics advances, our physical advances in technology, this is what Peter Thiel says, and he's right, have not advanced. They haven't. Computing has advanced. But we're not, they couldn't even make rockets as good as the Saturn V anymore at NASA. Like Boeing made the crappiest, spacecraft. Recently it was terrible, and they've made amazing things in the past. It's not the same people, and that's the point. But also, like, there's nothing new to build on. So people are just, it's like people are just recycling the same old ideas. How many times can you use the same physics to make a different thing? And there's a limit to that, actually. This is what Peter Thiel says all the time. And that he thinks that part of this is our school. And I would 100% agree with that, as I stated at the beginning of this podcast. This is very relevant to Eric's assertion that our physics has stalled. Like, you want to make physical advances in physical engineering, not just computational, speed, then revolutions, not iteration, but like revolution. Now, those are two different things. We don't have that anymore very often. It's very rare. And part of it is, it's a lot of things, like, how fast do you need to go when you're on a jet? But everybody wants to go fast. But the thing is like, you do need to make a working rocket if NASA pays you to and you work at Boeing. And if you can't make anything better than the Saturn V, and it's been 70 years, then there's like something's up. And it doesn't take that much thinking to recognize that there would be a link between the stalling of our advances in our understanding of our physics, and also like our stalling in our advancing of technology, like new technology, not just smaller cell phones, which is using the same physics. I mean, our tech uses the same physics as they had in the 1950s. There's no difference in physics of our tech. That's weird, because if you look at the 1920s versus the 1950s, there's not just a difference in tech, there's a difference in the physics that is being utilized by the tech. that's not happening anymore. And if you assume that there's more to be known about our physics, that we, additional degrees of freedom that could be useful, then there is a reason maybe we should start talking about like why it's not not why we're not advancing. And you would think that it would be faster. Each one is always faster usually than the previous. So, agricultural revolution to industrial revolution, which, now you have new physics. You have internal combustion physics going on. Then you have internal combustion physics, industrial revolution to nuclear revolution, new physics. Nuclear revolution to what? Like from a physics perspective, nothing. And so this is where Peter Thiel and Eric would align, but that doesn't mean that Thiel even is supportive of geometric unity at all. I think to assume that this is all because Thiel has like this nefarious motive is just, it's what's wrong about it, even if you're right, is that you don't know. And so you shouldn't assume it. Shouldn't. Like, it's wrong of you to assume it, even if you are right. Like, that's the point that I've been trying to make this whole podcast. And I hope that made sense. I'm going to go to the chat, and then maybe there's one or two more clips. But I hope this was found to be valuable. I always hesitate to do like a commentary about something Dave Farina puts out, because I know that when I first watched this, I was pissed because he said things I knew were not true about my friend. But, and he's also just cruel. And like that, it doesn't make me happy to see people be cruel. Even to other people who you think are cruel doesn't make you good. And this is actually the last clip, because I'll show before I go to the chat, because it's relevant to what I just said. Said, where is it? It's so good. I'll find it in a bit. But he basically says, like, I am the light and you are the dark, and it justifies me doing anything to you to, like, humiliate you. It's really what he says. And I will find the clip, because I'm not just going to claim that he says that without showing the other proof of it, but that's pretty, like, terrible. Like, that's just terrible. Okay. Let's go. Yeah, this reminds me of okay. I need to check out this guy so I can ask some questions, because I'm pretty sure that that's some good questions that I can ask that can start up a good dialogue, but I'm completely unaware of who you even are. Well, strap in. I stream once a week. You're not going to find out who I am from one stream, but I'm working on a fundamental metaphysical framework of the nature and structure of intrinsic existence, and with that it leads to a model of trying to show the constraints of cosmogenesis and evolution, basically. But my work is called Sentient Singularity Theory. You can look it up, sentientsingularity.com, and click on writings, and on there I have a poetic description of my perspective, and I also have a technical description of that, which is the abstract of a paper that I've been slowly working on. That would be a start. But come back. I mean, don't get me wrong. There have been a couple speakers that have spoke to Michael that have presented some very good research experience that would align very well with the biological stuff. Yeah. But, yeah, I would guess 3 hours is too much for somebody to try and comprehend something so significant. I don't know if you're talking about like Curt's iceberg of geometric unity or my stream tonight, but they're both probably about 3 hours. Yeah, that's some people are. I think a lot of times it's part of the self-projection thing. Yeah, I see. I try not to state that, but I'm not saying you're wrong. But it just you can't know, you know. But usually we do see what we already see. So like when you recognize something in someone else, it's because you already understand it in yourself. And but the thing is that that's true of everybody. So it's not it's not really a good specific criticism of anyone. But I mean, I've said this before. If you chase a chicken with its head cut off, you are a chicken with its head cut off. And if you think someone is a chicken with their head cut off, which means they're a liar, you think they're a liar or that they're lying, you know, if you think that they're a liar, you are a chicken with its head cut off. If you think they're lying and you're still like, and you don't know them personally, and so you don't know that they're lying, but you're gonna set out to try and prove that they're wrong, even though you think they're lying, and you're gonna dedicate time to that, you are chasing a chicken with its head cut off. Neither one of these is constructive and useful to anyone. So don't be a chicken with its head cut off, and don't chase chickens with their heads cut off. I mean, I have assumptions about why Dave is so. I mean, I basically stated he has a different goal. His goal is to promote the establishment. He says it. In the clip that I'm trying to look for, he says like, I try and protect the establishment. You undermine it, basically. And where is it? Oh, here it is. Yeah. This is if you have different. He has a different goal. I mean, that's what it is. But I would also say like, if you see yourself as valuable to the scientific narrative because you are promoting that which other people have deduced and constructed and proposed and that's been accepted by the establishment already, your only real credentials are the establishment. Is the acceptance of the establishment, not even the truth of whether or not the narrative, not even whether or not that narrative is true, that the establishment is accepted. It's whether or not, it's not about what is true. It's about whether or not you are aligned with, you're stating the same thing that is assumed within it. Whether or not you're aligned with it. Because if you're not aligned with it, then it kind of defeats the whole like point of using its, the master's degree that you got from it as like reason why you should be considered, reputable. And I'm not saying that this is why Dave is doing this, because he's threatened by, like, his whole identity is and feeling of value is threatened by anyone who may be right about the undermining of the system, or not even right, but like anyone who successfully undermines the perceived legitimacy of the institutional narrative, like, does undermine your credentials intrinsically. If your credentials are based on results, you don't care. But if your credentials are based on you have a master's degree in science education, then yeah, like your whole thing disappears. Your whole goal disappears. Like his whole mission of like preaching what is been, what is known to be true within scientific narrative already. Like that was, why would you make that your mission if it all could be overturned? Not even overturned. It's just that it's. But if something fundamentally is off, is shown, then it shows that the people involved with the institution did not understand what they thought that they did, and therefore what's the point of how does peer review give you legitimacy if like it turns out that guy didn't even understand anything about the subject that you were writing a paper about, that for some groundbreaking idea? It's like, if somebody who believes that we need to quantize gravity, and that's like the way to go, is peer reviewing your paper that is basically saying that we need to geometrize the quantum in Eric's sense, which is, I kind of get what that means. I think that sounds pretty much like what I would say is true. Then, and it turns out that Eric's right. Then who was that guy? Why was he the decider on whether or not Eric's paper and the ideas were considered legitimate? He was assuming something that like he had no reason to assume, or his reasons were not legitimate. Like they were just, this is what everybody believes. Don't you know? Quantum mechanics is fundamentally probabilistic. There's no reason for that to be true. Logically, it makes no sense. And observationally, the fact that you don't have an explanation for it, but you think that because you don't have an explanation, that means there is no explanation, and that it's therefore must be fundamental, means that you don't even understand what probability is. If it turns out that there is an explanation for why things appear to be probabilistic in quantum mechanics, everyone who said it's fundamentally probabilistic, just believe it. It doesn't make sense, but just it is the way that it is. Which, by the way, the logic of even that statement falls apart the more you think about it. Like, you can't say that is the way that it is without and know that it's true without an explanation. So, and there's no explanations for our current physics at this point. Like, there's none. Eric's trying to propose some of those. Why do we perceive chirality in physics? Why do we see the 3 generations of matter? Why do we think that there's a Higgs, and why there might not really be a Higgs, and that it's kind of was a trick of observation or something like that? Like these are he's trying to propose explanations to some degree, at least structural explanations. I think that it's going to require like philosophical context, and I'd love to have a conversation with him about that. But he's welcome on this podcast. So is Dave Farina, but I don't know how. I mean, he's always, anybody I talk about is welcome, even Dave, but also Eric. But there's no context given for most physics, and I don't even think Eric gives enough context for geometric unity. But I think that I see context that would make sense, and so that's why I think there is something there. But here you go.
Fucking thing. Oh, and if I had done something brilliant, you'd acknowledge it, like how you want everyone to acknowledge geometric unity as a revolutionary, paradigm-shifting masterpiece, even though you're really just a pointless professional troll. Let's get one thing real clear, Eric. I've done more for science than you have. Have I published any research? No, and neither have you. We are not scientists. We are a pair of non-scientists who have published the same 0 amount of science. But while you're a podcaster...
This is not, again, he defines it, you're a scientist if you publish. That's that. If that's the case, then why do we call the scientific method anymore? Like what? Like why don't we just call it you're a publisher of your ideas instead of you're a scientist? Again, he's using a definition that it makes the word redundant and useless and might as well not exist. It must mean that you are doing science. Being a scientist is not about publishing ideas. It's not about whether or not you're even right. It's about whether or not you are trying to figure out what is some things that are true about the nature of our world and about ourselves and about reality that can be incorporated into a collective narrative to some degree and then misinterpreted by everybody. But you don't have control over that. So you just accept it. But everything that somebody discovers and then becomes part of the scientific narrative or the societal narrative then gets misinterpreted by the majority eventually, and then it becomes used as justification for chaos. This is true of everything: religion, science. This is true even for the word science, and you can see evidence of this in what I just showed. People used to know what science meant. They used to know what intelligence meant. They used to know what agency meant. Now we say AI agents. What is an agent? I don't know. Maybe like every time you prompt a new prompt in a and you erase the previous engagements that you've had with a LLM, that's a new AI agent. Like, or is Grok an AI agent versus ChatGPT another AI agent? Agent implies agency, right? Like, this is not complicated. If it doesn't imply agency anymore, then what does agency mean? And what does an agent mean? It means nothing. It all falls apart. This is what the word science has become. If being a scientist means publishing papers. Like, sure, we can maintain coherence and use that definition, but we will also experience a redundant term that is now useless, and you have destroyed the definition of the term because you're using it to describe something that we already had a term for, and now there's no term for the thing that's really important that we needed a term for, and that's why we had it originally. We had a need to say agency. You have agency. Okay, well, if a Grok, every time you open Grok, it's a new AI agent. And does it have agency? And if that's the case, do you have agency anymore? What does agency mean? I mean, it's just, this is very important. I will do a full video on this because this is actually like, I think, a legitimately like monumental discovery that I've made, if it's not already been discovered by linguists in the past. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but I'm gonna find out because it is huge. Like, every word is like has these same constraints and degrees of freedom, and if you know that, you can see where we're going wrong with words, and it will help us be like, no, that can't be the definition of intelligence, because if we do that, the whole meaning and purpose of even having a separate word disappears. It's like, okay, well then let's not define it that way. But anyways, science. If science matters, if science is a thing that's real, that we will, and it's defining something important enough to be defined, it does not mean like publishing papers.
Science denial. I support the scientific community and teach science concepts to budding future scientists. Now that I'm 10 years in, I have helped many thousands of people become scientists, who in turn do lots of science. Who have you helped? Have you helped anyone pass a class or get a job? Of course not. You tear science down. I build it up. You are the dark. I am the light. You get paid by oligarchs to poison society. I root for humanity, reflect your negativity back onto you, and neutralize your awfulness. You can't acknowledge that because you need for me to be a villain in your tale of persecution. But fewer and fewer people are falling for that story every day. You're nearly extinct, and this little jab is born of pure panic, after being repeatedly knocked down from your high horse by yours truly. Never fucking forget it. All right.
Do I have a need to, like, if I need to explain anything about that to you and why just that's awful and also just not true, then this is not the podcast for you. Like, then you just took Dave at his word, or you're being convinced by his, like, cute emojis or something, instead of recognizing that, like, a lot of those justifications are not relevant, that he's using are not relevant, and like, his definition of science is not, it's not a good one. It ends up meaning nothing, and like, he does not, that he has different goals. Like, the idea that, science, what does science denial mean? Like, what the heck is science denial? There are people that actually deny, if science means, like, the truth, as far as, like, our collective pursuit of truth and our collective narrative of what is assumed to be true within our institutions, meaning, like, it's what society takes as the truth. If that's what science is, then, which I think Dave would say yes, even though in practice he would call somebody a scientist only if they're publishing papers, then the scientific method isn't anything anymore, and it just all unravels. It all unravels. Like it's not about. Sean Carroll's published countless papers about like ideas that have never been confirmed, or falsified. And there's when Eric rants about like how the rules are enforced on some people but not on others, and you have people out there saying like there's 11 dimensions to space, and we don't know what those dimensions are yet though, but the math is there. And it's like you've just defined dimension out of existence. You don't even realize where we got these 4 dimensions that we currently assume. It's not from freaking math. It's supported by math, but it's not from math. It's from observation. Do you observe 11 freaking dimensions? And Eric's proposing 14 dimensional observers. I actually think that there's a context that makes sense, but until it's shown to like be confirmed, it's going to be just as much of an idea as any other, 11 dimensions. But at least I will say this. He has some idea of what these dimensions could be. He's like, it could be this or it could be that. Where instead of like, we don't know, these dimensions could be very, very small. It's like, bro, this is not about size. Like that you would, if you say that, then dimension doesn't matter anymore. Like this is everywhere in our sciences. And if you propose something like that, or many worlds, and nobody, and people publish your paper and nobody stops it and doesn't publish it because it's unfalsifiable, or it appears to be unfalsifiable, which I don't even think is a good judge of whether or not something should be considered like a given legitimate consideration in, our scientific narrative. But still, if you do believe that, then how are you going to let frickin' many worlds and string theory through? You can't. You can't. Not as physics paper. And but they do. And then when somebody proposes something like geometric unity, and it's not, Sean Carroll, then it's like, well, is that falsifiable? People said this to me. They were like, your theory's unfalsifiable. It's like, yeah, I know. It seems that way. I've really tried. And the foundational assertion of my theory is unfalsifiable. I think it is also constantly confirmable. It's not just unfalsifiable. It seems inevitably true. Everywhere you look, you see evidence of it too. You can't deny that. Everybody, there's no denying that that's true. But we don't want to take that as evidence. It's like, okay, well, if everywhere you look, it appears like sentient will and intentionality and action is required to set something in, to create a causal chain. Like, why are you assuming that it's not necessary? Like it's everywhere you've looked, you've seen that. You've never seen any causal chain just happen without some actor. And yes, who makes the weather, the way that it is, and who makes the galaxy spin and the universe spin? Can you see them? No, but there are logical arguments that would seem to support the inevitability of an actor. Like, and you have to contend with those logical arguments. You can't just be like, well, we can't see it, so it's nonsense. Why is it not nonsense when it's Sean Carroll proposing something we can't see, or Michio Kaku? We don't see those 11 dimensions. They're really, really small. Maybe the rules are not consistent, and honestly, it doesn't matter though, because if you do some piece of work that is groundbreaking and make some type of contribution that is legitimate and constructive and adding to our scientific narrative, not just like parroting things that people discovered in the past, like Dave's entire catalog of content can be replaced by ChatGPT in 2 minutes at this point. If geometric unity cannot actually, even if it's false, it can't. If it's true, it really can't. Elon Musk thinks that ChatGPT or that Grok will be making physics proposals that are and discoveries in like the year. If I'm wrong, I don't think that that's correct. But if I'm wrong, I'll admit it. But like that does not. There's reasons why that does not make any sense at all. But that's because it's just taking what people have already said and repackaging it. That's what Dave does. That's not what Eric's doing. It's much harder. And it is what actually builds science. There's no building science if all you do is parrot what is already known. Like Dave thinks that he is pro-science. I'm telling you, the mentality that he has is the type of that would be like calling Einstein a fraud before it was undeniable that he was onto something because of results. Like that is what Dave's mentality is. It's not. I'm not making assumptions. He's defending only what is currently known, and that's it. And anybody who challenges that on any kind of fundamental understanding of it, he calls them a science denier. This is the same mentality that attacked people for changing from a to a heliocentric model of the solar system. I'm not even saying that that's the right way to look at it or the wrong way to look at it. I'm just saying that when they changed it, when somebody proposed it, and I think it was what, Galileo, he was like locked in prison or something, like for science denial, for truth denial, for challenging some fundamental, like seemingly fundamental structures in what was currently the consensus of the establishment at the time. That's Dave's side. The side that attacked every single person who ever made a discovery that was like groundbreaking. Fact, not assumption. Absolute fact. And it is apparent. And Eric doesn't have to be right for that to be apparent. He could be totally wrong. But what matters is that he doesn't look into the work. That's what matters in order to dismiss it. He doesn't look into he would dismiss my work. He would do the same thing to me. He has said some things that indicate that he watches one of these videos, and he was like dismissing people who would propose that sentience is fundamental or something. It's just like useless idea. Like, okay, dude, think maybe you watched a video, maybe not, but yeah, this is like, I mean, every single person that is not promoting an idea that is not currently accepted by the establishment is attacked by Dave and called a fraud and a liar and a con man and a moron. By the way, many of these things are not entirely like, how are you a con man and a moron? It's like, then you're just saying, oh, well, maybe he's just trying to trick people into believing his idea, which means that he doesn't believe it himself. But he also has a misplaced genius complex. And that's why he thinks that he could propose something that is groundbreaking. Like, I don't think I'm a genius. My IQ is probably lower than yours. It's definitely lower than Dave Farina's. I would bet everything in my bank account that my IQ is lower than Dave Farina's. Guess what? I will outthink Dave Farina any day of the week, probably, because I practice it. Like, but he'll memorize information that I will forget in like 2 minutes. But I will outthink him almost every time. I guarantee it. And but that's something he could change. He could get better at it. And maybe with the higher IQ, he could eventually get better than me. I don't know. But right now, he's not thinking, actually. You can't be like, everybody knows that geometric unity is that there's nothing there. And by the way, it's not worth watching these 3-hour-long attempts at explaining it because it's 3 hours. Dude, like, you don't even try to explain whether or not to figure something out, and then you're like, I've figured it out enough to tell you it's nonsense. This is the norm. As the normative product of our education system. It is. It is. And it's awful. I think a lot of times it's sort of okay, what people consider paranormal just has to do with the inner realities of that are not our own. That's what I was trying to think. The whole flat earth thing. It's a real dogmatic way of being, regardless of it's right or wrong. It gets real dogmatic. Yep, it does. Really seems like there's a certain agendas being pushed. Obviously, like you said, money is involved with certain ideologies being pushed. Yeah, it's not even about that so much. Like, people are paid to do all kinds of things, and I think it's like it's just a lack of understanding. And so if you don't understand something, then you're just, why not just go with where the money is? You know, you need to have understanding to have convictions. We don't have that anymore very often. Regardless of if they're robotic or organic, it seems a lot more like mechanical robotic type of systems or individuals nowadays. Yeah, well, they're just not they're not thinking. They're not exercising will, which is, you know, it takes a choice to think. I believe it's part of gatekeeping method in which they don't even want to expose an individual's ideas or character. That's part of it, for sure. But I'm not even saying it's conscious, but it is. It's just a part of what Eric calls the disc or the ego, both of them, the embedded growth obligation. It's like everybody just wants to get accepted and get paid, you know, feed their families. But that contributes to nobody, you know, causing waves. And that does lead to a distributed idea suppression complex. But anyways, I'm going to go, but I hope this was interesting. I hope I did a decent job of not being a dick, of being cruel, and I hope I made some sense. Please hit the like button. Please leave any comments, questions you have down below. Hit the bell notification. Watch Curt's videos if you do want to actually understand geometric unity. I'm not saying he gets everything right. I don't know, but I know he's trying, and he gets a lot right. And then he talks to Eric about it. What more could you ask for? You know, there's no other way to like figure out this if you want to actually try and understand it other than to dive in. So